Hello everybody, Thersites the Historian here. I'm joined by Sean Chick, and tonight we're going to be exploring 35 or so generals of Napoleon, all of whom were important, but none of them made the rank of Marshal. We will be looking at them fairly holistically, mostly focusing on their military skills, but also focusing on other aspects of their lives and careers. And just as a reminder, I have a Discord channel that you can find if you look for it. It will also be linked in the description of this video and all subsequent videos, so be on the lookout if you are into that kind of thing. Here is an image of what it looks like. And now we will switch over to the list. We'll be ranking everyone from S to F. If you're S tier, then you are a military genius, basically. If you're F tier, then Napoleon would have been better off letting the men lead themselves and just, hoping for the best. So, Sean, can you give us some preliminary remarks?
Yeah, we'll be going over a variety of generals who didn't make the rank of Marshal. I mean, there are only 26 Marshals, and you'll be surprised a number of these men will hold very important positions even more important than several of Napoleon's Marshals, and yet, of course, not attain that rank. Overall, once again, we have a very talented list here, although maybe a little more erratic in quality. Marshals, I would say. And a lot of these are also going to be ones who fought, of course, in the French Revolutionary Wars as well. In fact, some of them, that's almost exclusively what they fought in. There's actually a few generals on this list who did not fight in the Napoleonic Wars. So, really looking forward to this one. Good to talk about guys who didn't make Marshal.
All right. Well, first up on our list, which is arranged approximately alphabetically, we have Napoleon's stepson, Eugene Rosé de Beauharnais.
Yeah, the only son of Josephine and her husband, who himself was a general in the French Revolution until he lost his head.
Yeah.
What do you know about Eugene?
I know that he was, Napoleon regarded him as a son, even though the age difference between them was not large enough for that to really make sense. I think, they're only 12 years apart or something like that. And, anyway, Eugene was actually fairly capable, but Napoleon didn't utilize him to the fullest because he didn't want Eugene to be too implicated in the regime, especially in the later stages, because Napoleon thought Eugene might be imprisoned or executed. So I think Eugene offered his services late, and Napoleon rejected him, and in order to try to protect him. But from what I understand, fairly talented guy, actually.
You're talking about during the 100 Days, right?
Yeah, the 100 Days.
Yeah, I had read that Eugene didn't get to go there because he was prevented by his father-in-law, I believe. One of the things interesting about Eugene is that the coalition apparently did offer him a crown to try to win him over. Yeah, his father-in-law was the king of Bavaria, and apparently he's the one prevented him joining for the 100 Days. Now, you mentioned the age difference with him and Napoleon. Should be kept in mind, though, that he meets Napoleon when he's a teenager. And Eugene, he's extremely dutiful, loyal, honest, amiable, very, very few enemies of any kind. And Eugene also played an important role in reconciling Napoleon with his mother after both of them had essentially, Josephine had made adultery while Napoleon was in Italy, and then while Napoleon was in Egypt, he found out about that, so he starts committing adultery, and it appeared the two of them were going to separate, and Eugene played an important role in bringing them together.
Oh.
Yeah. Eugene is also one of the most successful commanders on his own, fighting in Italy. And particularly, he did very well in 1814. Holding northern Italy against the coalition, his biggest victory coming at Mincio. So there are a cadre of historians who think Eugene is one of Napoleon's best commanders. Certainly one of the most loyal and genuine. And we're talking, very good administrator as well. People tended to like him. In many ways, he doesn't have any of the vices of the other Napoleonic commanders. So it's very hard to rate Eugene lowly. I don't know about S tier necessarily, but I'd definitely say A.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he was pretty useful for the Empire, so sounds like a pretty solid A candidate to me. I guess, do you remember any of his individual victories, or are they mostly small scale stuff?
Smaller scale stuff, but impressive all the same. He led the Fourth Corps in Russia and did very well at Borodino and Malo-Jarsovets. I'm probably butchering that one, but so it's hard to find too many places where Eugene stumbles. I don't think he's quite a genius, though, but I'd say an A for sure.
All right, that's fair enough. And I guess even though he's not quite a blood relative of Napoleon, if we count him among Napoleon's relatives, would it be safe to say that he is the top guy?
Yeah, with the possible exception of Lucien, who was the politician, though.
Right.
But he had an independent streak, and he and Napoleon had a falling out.
Also, wasn't Lucien more of a diplomat than a soldier when in terms of what he would potentially contribute?
Diplomat, soldier, politician. He was widely recognized as second smartest of the Bonapartes. Although Joseph wasn't an idiot either, but we'll get to him later. I kind of have a soft spot for Joseph.
Yeah, I kind of do too, actually. He seems like a relatively capable guy who just wasn't up for what Napoleon wanted him to do.
And to his credit, he didn't want to do it either.
Yeah. So, next up is someone who's more of a military man, Louis Desailles.
Yeah, Desailles is also one of the most admired of the commanders in the Napoleonic Wars, I would say. They find it. I got Napoleon this great quote about Desailles. Lived only for noble ambition and true glory. His character was formed on the ancient model. That is an ancient historian. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, what do you think of that as an ancient historian, that he's formed on the ancient model?
I think that one or both of the people involved in the quote read some Plutarch.
The things I do know about Desailles is Napoleon, and he met him in Italy. And at first they didn't quite get along, but they both acknowledged they were skillful commanders. Desailles went to Egypt and was actually pretty popular with the locals. He earned the nickname the Just Sultan. Desailles was kind of Napoleon in Egypt. When he has to give someone an independent mission, he gives it to Desailles. And another telling thing is that Desailles was friends with Kleber, and Kleber did not like Napoleon. And we'll talk more about that in detail when we get to him. But they didn't like each other, and Desailles sided with Napoleon over Kleber. He stayed in Egypt, though, was captured by the British, returned in time from Marengo, where he led the attack that won the battle, but he was mortally wounded during the fighting. Universally mourned. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that if Desailles had lived to 1804, he would have become one of the first marshals for sure.
Where on the list would he have ranked? Do you think?
Probably a top 10 for sure. I mean, Napoleon this time not only trusts Desailles, he considers Desailles one of the finest commanders that he ever met.
Okay, wow, that's pretty high praise. And Napoleon could be harsh with some of these guys.
Could be. And Desailles, Desailles was a pretty good administrator as well. He was dashing and humane. It's hard to find too many people who disliked him. In fact, he has a street named after him in New Orleans.
Oh, really? Yeah, so wasn't he present at the Battle of the Pyramids and maybe as a wing commander?
Yes, he was at the Pyramids. But the Pyramids is kind of a... I hate saying this about any battle, but it's a bit of a foregone conclusion. So, I'm not saying his leadership's bad there, of course. I'm just saying that important there is that the Napoleonic infantry squares are not going to fall to Malamute cavalry. It's not. there's, I mean, you know, unless there's like some unforeseen disaster, which I mean could theoretically happen, on some rare occasions did break squares. All right. And of course, the ferociousness of the Malamute cavalry was such that Napoleon had a unit that followed him around. And I think he had a Malamute as his personal bodyguard.
Yeah, I remember reading that one of the Mamluks came with him and was always in attendance and armed with, the curved sword and everything.
And he did have a company of them, like maybe around 100 or so men who were attached to the cavalry. There's the two famous Goya paintings. There's the 3rd of May, and then there's the 2nd of May. 2nd of May, she depicts Napoleon's Malamute cavalry in Madrid fighting the locals.
Ah.
I don't know. To say is, I mean, do you think he's cut? Do you think he's formed on the ancient model?
Sounds kind of like it. He sounds like he is someone who read about Alexander the Great and wanted to be as much like that as he could. So, yeah, that sounds about right. Especially if he also didn't have very many vices or whatnot.
No, not in particular. I think he could be a bit of a ladies' man, I think, but don't quote me on that one.
Well, so could most of the ancient figures. So,
yeah, there you go. Cut on the ancient model.
Especially if you're talking about Demetrius.
Good man. I would give Desaix an A. It's hard to find any blemishes. Now, granted, he didn't do as much in independent command, but I not only have no reason to doubt that he would be good. When he was given missions on his own or did things on his own initiative, he did them well.
So not an S?
Yeah, not an S. I'll go with an A.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Yeah, so those are two of the bigger ones. Also, two of the ones on here. I think out of this list of 35, I maybe know 11 or 12 of these guys going in. The next guy I definitely don't know, Antoine Drew.
Is one of the more boring men on this list.
Well, he kind of looks like it. I mean, he doesn't look like he's he looks like he could be a high school principal if you just change out his clothes.
That makes sense. A fun fact: he was at Trafalgar. He was on the ship in Optimal or something, and he was one of the army artillery officers sent there to help with their gunnery. So he was considered an artillery expert. He was transferred to that service, particularly well at Wagram and in the Russian campaign. He was also one of the only Napoleonic generals to remain religious. There was kind of amongst the Napoleonic high command like a scoffing attitude towards Christianity and Catholicism, or at least skepticism for sure. But he actually had a Bible that he would carry around in battle. Very courageous and modest. His grand moment came at Leipzig, where he placed his artillery on Gallows Heights and racked the coalition. I mean, just horrendous losses. And Napoleon, in reaction, or at least later on, apparently said, "Had I possessed 30,000 artillery rounds at Leipzig, today I would be master of the world."
Damn.
So yeah, Drouet is easily one of the finest artillery commanders of this era. Was given command of the Imperial Guard during the Waterloo campaign, which really wasn't his expertise. He was known as an artillery guy, not an infantry commander. But to be fair, it was done at the last minute because Mortier had fallen ill. So this was not Napoleon's first choice. And to be fair, he was a guard officer. He was known in the guard. So I think Napoleon made the best choice he could at that moment. I don't know. It's hard to find too many blemishes with the guy. Loved him. Napoleon held him in the highest regard. Failed at Waterloo, but he was out of his element too. I'd kind of give him an A.
All right. So we've had a lot of pretty solid people to start with then. Pretty reliable officer corps we're building here.
Yeah, like I said, this shows you that the Napoleonic, victories, the number of good officers, it runs deep.
All right. Well, our next guy is Guillaume Philibert Duhamel. Or maybe it's Duhamel, something like that.
I don't know. I'll go with Duhamel. Duhamel, who served with Jourdan and Kleber. He fought at battles like Fleury. He fought on the Rhine. Mostly known for is that one battle at Drisheim, he rallied his troops by beating on a drum with the pommel of his sword. This made him like a hero in France. He was considered a light infantry expert and wrote a book on the subject as well. And he led a division in 1805 and 1806. So Duhamel is considered very good. He achieves corps command in Spain and captured Barcelona, where he persuaded the Spanish governor to admit him with a convoy of sick Frenchmen. At end, his grenadiers leapt out from the stretchers and then captured the castle.
Damn.
One of the most amazing. Yeah, exactly. So very intelligent officer. Problem with him was that looting and cruelty. Okay. To the point where Augereau actually accused him of thievery, which means either Duhamel was even bigger thief than Augereau, or in my opinion, Augereau was trying to distract attention from himself. But he was relieved in 1810. It was believed that he had failed in Spain. Although he had captured Barcelona, his area was known in particular for guerrilla activity.
Well, I guess to be fair, he did violate the norms of war by using the flag of truce to capture a city.
Yeah, true. Very true. Duhamel joined Napoleon for the 100 Days at Waterloo in Ligny, where he did superb. But here's the problem. Was put in command of the Young Guard. I believe this is one of Napoleon's biggest mistakes. Because Duhamel had poor experience. He was obviously a first-rate commander. He should have commanded a corps at Waterloo, not simply the Young Guard. Don't get me wrong. The Young Guard is one of the most prestigious posts in the army, but I think it was a bit of a waste of his talents. He was mortally wounded, by the way, at Waterloo, making him one of, if not the last general to die in the Napoleonic Wars.
Damn, that's a interesting fact. I didn't know that.
I think one of the things that might have prevented Duhamel's rise, though, is that he never served directly under Napoleon until 1814. Because, in Spain, he was on his own. In 1805, he was in Italy with Massena. He never fought with Napoleon in Italy. And, Napoleon did tend to promote officers that he already knew. So I would rate him a B. Very good leader, able tactician. I don't see too many blemishes, but it appears that he might have been a little too morally suspect, and that was a big problem.
Yeah, I guess to be fair, with the exception of Suchet, Spain didn't really enhance anybody's reputation.
Yeah, very few of these guys.
Yeah. All right, well, our next individual is someone who perhaps has a little more significance in the history of Western literature, at least his son does. Thomas-Alexandre Dumas.
Thomas-Alexandre Dumas, the only one on this list who was born a slave in Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti. So, what do you know about Mr. Dumas here?
Well, I know that it was very unusual for a French general to be a black guy from Haiti, so he stood out. But I also know that he was very known for his courage, and he was also a pretty capable cavalry commander. I want to say he died in action fairly early on, though.
Yeah, well, it had to do with his imprisonment. I had a definite independent streak. Now, he gets where he is because his father is a French noble, had a bastard child with a slave woman. And when his father went back to France, he brought him with him and said, you're going to get an education, and then got him into the military. So, he also assumed his mother's name, by the way, so as not to cause scandal for his father. But he's a tall man, imposing strength, natural dash. I say independent streak. One of my favorite stories about him was when his army was fighting during the Revolution. He did actually command a French army for a time. He was given a shipment of guillotines to use. Instead, he burned the guillotines, and when asked why, he said, "I'm cold. I needed a fire." Um, yeah, he led cavalry on the Pyrenees, along the Alps, um, and he led a division in Italy under Napoleon, but not early in the Italian campaign, later on. Now, at first, him and Napoleon didn't really get along too well, but it was pretty soon. It was pretty soon. Dumas was proving that he was a very capable commander. So when Napoleon goes to Egypt, he makes Dumas his cavalry. And he's the guy in charge of the pyramids. He oversees the French attacks that sweep the Mamelukes away after they've already destroyed themselves on the attacking the infantry squares. And Kleber actually discussed a mutiny against Napoleon. Damn. So what happens is, but Napoleon gets wind of this, and Dumas became ill, so Napoleon replaced him. Also, I believe Moreau was the one who was ratting out on Dumas and said, "Hey, this Dumas is against you. You can't trust him."
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, what happened is when he left for France, he was captured by the Kingdom of Naples, imprisoned, tortured, and Napoleon had made no attempt to ransom him. He was released. He was apparently partially paralyzed, blind in one eye, deaf in one ear, and physically broken. He was given no pension, because Napoleon hated him that much for betraying him, if you will. Might have been some racism there as well. I mean, Napoleon at this time was trying to bring back slavery in the Caribbean because it's very profitable. But by the way, as a quick aside, should be mentioned that Toussaint Louverture, the Haitian leader.
Yeah.
It should be kept in mind that in Haiti, he essentially reinstituted semi-slavery. Okay? So I know people like to try to make Toussaint Louverture into like a really big hero nowadays, and I get it. But when you read about that guy, he was a shady fuck, right?
This is kind of like the foundation of Liberia then, where basically it was slavery without the racial divide.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it wasn't straight up slavery, but it was almost like a kind of a serfdom that Louverture was trying to put onto Haiti. So keep that in mind about Toussaint Louverture. Fascinating man. Remember Dr. Popkin? Remember him at the University of Kentucky?
Yeah.
He was like an expert in the Haitian Revolution. That was what he was studying at the time. And he essentially told me that Toussaint Louverture was an opportunist, first and foremost.
That's believable.
But that he was not the romantic hero that he's made out to be necessarily. But anyway, don't want to get into that. I know some things about Overture, and I've read a few books, Haitian Revolution, but not enough to have a hard and fast opinion. Anyway, point is that Napoleon might have been against Dumas for racial and or slavery reasons. Definitely was against him, though, when he realized that Dumas was contemplating a mutiny. As you know, who did Dumas give birth to?
The famous writer, his son.
Yeah, Three Musketeers, the Count of Monte Cristo.
Yep. So for that reason alone, he at least has some claim to fame.
Yep. And his name was included in the Arc de Triomphe. Should be noted that Napoleon didn't have that scrubbed off. And as far as the son goes, he didn't really know his father. His father died when he was 4 years old. I think Alexandre Dumas, though, did say that he had a few memories of his father talking about not Napoleonic, but talking about the French Revolutionary Wars. But he didn't really know his dad, of course. No, Dumas. There's not too many major battles that he fought in as a cavalry commander. He mostly did lots of scouting, raiding, patrols, which he did all very well. He might have been a bit difficult to work with, both his intrigues against Napoleon and his burning of the guillotines. And while I agree definitely with the burning of the guillotines, it shows an independent streak, and I think Dumas might have had a hard time working with others. In addition to, of course, the fact that he's like the bastard son, slave woman, and a French noble. That's not going to win you as many points with some of these French revolutionary characters. I'd probably go with a B, though.
All right. Interesting guy, at any rate. Probably one of the more interesting people on this list, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Easily one of the 5 or 10 most fascinating generals of the era.
All right, next up we have Pierre-Antoine Dupont de Latong, something like that. But I guess he mostly goes by Dupont.
Oh, DuPont. Oh, man, I love
Yeah.
talking about DuPont. Oh, one thing I want to mention. If you go to his Wikipedia page for DuPont, the last, I mean, I've checked it out over the years. It's gone from being relatively short to now it's like a novella. You know?
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're, it's like academia is obsessed with issues of race. Racial issues, of course, are front and center in America in the last few years in particular. So no surprise that the article is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger,
Especially the last week.
Yeah, yeah, among other things. Although we're not here to talk about current affairs.
But,
Yeah, DuPont. You know much about DuPont?
I do not.
Yeah, he supported Napoleon's rise to power. He served with on the Napoleon staff in 1800, and he fought under Brune at Peloso. Napoleon, I mean, so DuPont was known for being a very hard fighting, aggressive commander, hard marcher too. He was also a scholar. He wrote poetry, and in his later life, translated Homer and Horace.
It's pretty cool.
Pretty interesting, huh? But yeah, so DuPont was a division commander in the 1805 and 1806 campaigns. He did superb. One battle, Haschlock, he defeated a Austrian force 3 times his size by attacking them head on. And this is one of the major battles that doomed Mack at Ulm. So it's natural that. Oh yeah, it's one of his other finest hours is Friedland, where it's his regular French infantry defeat the Russian guards. So by the time you get to the invasion of Spain, DuPont is seen as like the rising star of the army. Given command of a corps, and he's sent on what's probably the toughest mission in Spain. He was sent to Andalusia to quell a revolt. And his corps is a bit isolated, though, and it wasn't the best corps. It had Swiss troops, a lot of raw recruits. And so his corps, he's given a tough mission. He doesn't have the best men. And then he is defeated at Balen. And one of the reasons is because the Spanish threatened to massacre his command. So he surrendered 17,000 French soldiers. And the destruction of DuPont's corps unravels the entire situation in Spain, causes Napoleon to have to go to Spain. It also breaks the illusion of Napoleonic invincibility. Okay? Now, in some ways, Balen has some negative effects. The Spanish afterwards got too confident. Sometimes they would try to replicate Balen without realizing that at Balen they fought second-rate French troops and they had a positional advantage,
Sure.
But anyway, was court-martialed, imprisoned, even denied visitors. And when the Bourbons were returned to power, he was not only made Minister of War, which was considered a way to insult the Napoleonic system, but became like an extreme reactionary. Yeah, I'll say this, though. In some ways, I feel bad for DuPont because I think Napoleon was so enraged by the battle that officers who were involved were essentially blackballed. Napoleon, I think, probably overreacted in his punishment for DuPont. I mean, DuPont was in a hard situation. And by doing that, he also lost one of his up-and-coming commanders. So I think Napoleon, this is one of his first major military personnel failures. Been better to have looked at DuPont and been like, like something like Indiana Jones, right? Like, you may have lost today, kid, but doesn't mean you have to like it, right?
Right.
Because when I first read about DuPont, I was like, oh, he lost Balen, he must be an idiot. No, superb as a division commander. I mean, the guys in division commander is like John Bell Hood, Robert E. Lee's army. Like that kind of caliber.
Right.
I don't want to give him an A just because he did suffer this horrendous defeat. But I honestly got to go with a B, and I think Napoleon railroaded him. Oh, fun fact: he was also a military theorist, but his stuff isn't read like Jomini and Clausewitz. While they're still read, he isn't.
I guess he probably had a lot more actual military experience than either of them, right?
No, those guys had a lot of experience. They were both staff officers. DuPont had more like I'm in command of a brigade, a division, that kind of stuff.
I see.
Yeah, no. Jomini and Clausewitz had a lot of experience. And I actually, for a thing, I read Clausewitz's memoirs and his analysis of Napoleon's Russian campaign. I still think it's actually overall one of the best books on the campaign.
All right, next up.
No.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just saying. I think DuPont's a very good commander. Who's next?
Next up, we have Maximilian Sebastian Foy.
Oh, I put Foy on the list, huh?
Yeah.
Foy's interesting. Foy was almost put in jail. He was not a supporter of the Jacobins. He was definitely more of a liberal, if you will. And he very enthusiastically supported the Directory. Harsh critic of Napoleon. Thought he was too autocratic and refused a position on his staff. So Napoleon, while he didn't like Foy personally, he said, but Foy has skills. We decided to keep him around. Did serve at Ulm. He went to Turkey for a time to teach their Turkish officers French military stuff, and then he was sent to Spain, where he typically commanded a division. He did very well in Spain overall. He was typically the British considered him one of the best of the division commanders around. Kind of a right-hand man to Soule during the Pyrenees campaign. Supported Napoleon's return in 1815, not because he loved Napoleon, of course, but because he hated the Bourbons much more. I think Napoleon made a mistake at Waterloo in not giving him a corps command. Instead, he gave him command of a division. Oh, Foy got wounded quite a bit as well. So he's known for being courageous and whatnot. Fun fact about him. Foy actually had investments in England, so the British would send him stock market news.
Oh, wow.
During the Peninsular War.
That's funny.
Yeah, he also, by the way, wrote about the Peninsular War as well. One of our best sources on, especially. Foy was not by any means a genius, and of course, his reputation is hurt a bit by the fact that he mostly fought in Spain. The thing is, everybody in Spain would always say, even after a defeat, they'd be like, we didn't do so well, but man, Foy was in top form, and he was very brave. I'd probably give him a C, maybe a D. I'll go with a C.
But so far on this list, maybe he'd be the guy to go to if you were trying to start an investment portfolio.
Yes, he is my financial advisor, just so you know.
Well, I guess he's probably cheaper than Franklin Templeton or all the other services. All right. Well, our next guy is someone I know is one of your personal favorites, François-Étienne Kellerman.
I do like Kellerman, one of the best of the cavalry commanders. He led one of the charges at Marengo that won the day. He led the charge in support of Desaix. Napoleon actually did dismiss him after Marengo because Kellerman had financial indiscretions, and he was considered a bad looter even by French standards. But he's charismatic, he's popular with the soldiers, and he's brought back to command divisions like, say, Austerlitz and whatnot. Led a cavalry corps in Germany in 1813. And what's interesting is when Napoleon returned from Elba, his father didn't want to back Napoleon. His father was one of the marshals. He did. And it should be noted that at Courtebras, his charges were essentially what almost broke the Anglo-Allied lines and did assure that Courtebras was a minor French victory in many ways. His cavalry also did pretty well at Waterloo. He managed to destroy a few regiments. The charges that did destroy the Napoleonic cavalry at Waterloo, led those horrible losses, were Ney's fault. Yeah, so Kellerman was a first-rate cavalry commander, easily one of the top 10 of the era, maybe even the top 5. Probably got to go with a B. There's not much to know about how he would have acted in independent command. And he did have some personal failings, but overall, he's probably the best cavalry corps commander that the French have.
So, in theory, if Napoleon had promised to pay him more if he would just stop looting, do you think he could have been more?
Yeah. I guess, like, if you want to do a financial portfolio, you get Foy, and if you want to steal, you get this guy, right?
Yeah. So I guess as a cavalry commander, he's probably pretty good at bringing in the forage.
Yeah, he's definitely good at bringing in the forage.
Was he on the Russian campaign, or?
Was he? I'm trying to think. Oh no, he wasn't. His health had taken a downturn, so he was actually on break for a few years.
Oh. Well, that's interesting. All right. Our next commander is Dominique Jean Larry, or Laurie, or however you say that.
Yeah, one of the most important men on this list. He was trained as a doctor, came from the middle class, although he was an orphan at age 13. And while he saw the rapid deployment of French artillery in Italy, he invented the flying ambulance that could pick up wounded. He doesn't invent amputation, but he popularizes amputation.
Oh.
Yeah. And he improves medical care in general. So this is one of the reasons why the French medical service is arguably the best of these wars. Easily, definitely one of the best. Sure. If a high-ranking general was wounded, he was the guy who took care of them.
Nice.
Yeah. Napoleon loved this man. I mean, he considered him one of the finest men he had ever met. What was going to say about him? Napoleon said, "The most virtuous man that I have ever known."
Wow.
And Napoleon was actually planning a monument to him in his later reign. Probably what Laurie's problem was that if he had any defects, is that he wasn't very good at army politics. He had a number of enemies, and he undertook maybe a little too much surgery himself, which could hurt his administrative abilities. But I think that's also because he rightfully saw himself as one of the best surgeons around, so why not be involved? You kind of get with Laurie this feeling that you have a man who's very intelligent, a reformer, but also somebody who thinks that he knows best. And to be fair, he oftentimes does. He did serve, by the way, as chief surgeon to Louis Philippe I.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Also, his medical treatises, that he wrote were translated and used well into the 20th century.
So I guess his expertise would have been battlefield wounds, or did he do other types of medicine too?
That's essentially it, just probably battlefield wounds, surgery. He is one of the most important figures in the 19th century in terms of advancing medicine. You got other guys like, you have like John Snow, Louis Pasteur. A variety of people are making major strides in science and in understanding medicine better, and he is one of them. I rate him an S.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, weird person on this list, right? We have a guy in here who does not command troops in the battle, but his effect on medical practice, especially military ones, is cannot be overstated.
Well, I guess he's kind of a support guy, but one who definitely made things easier for everybody else.
He left his mark on history.
Yeah, no, I didn't know all those things about him. That's pretty fascinating.
I guess all these guys did. Of course, all these guys left their mark on history, but I think he has the most reach, if you will.
Yeah, I guess he doesn't have a lot of name recognition, but I guess if you talk about standards and practices of battlefield medicine and also just medicine, clearly his actual impact outweighs everybody else.
Very true. And yeah, it should be noted again that despite how bad he was in army politics, he won over Napoleon hook, line, and sinker. Napoleon never lost faith in him.
Yeah, that's so he must not have been that terrible at army politics.
Well, I think he's bad, but he won over the one guy he had to win over.
Yeah. Well, I guess as long as Napoleon's around, that's good enough.
Exactly, but it should be noted that even when he was chief surgeon to Louis Philippe I, he was ousted from that position through politics. I guess he didn't win over Louis Philippe I as much either, huh?
Well, I guess to be fair, Louis Philippe I wasn't asking him to keep his generals alive after a major battle.
True, very true. Who's our next knucklehead?
Our next guy is from the French Revolutionary period. He was once senior to Napoleon, Jean-Victor Marie Moreau.
Oh man, this is one of the most fascinating men on this list, and one of the big enigmas as well. Do you know much about Moreau?
I know he was one of the major generals of the French Revolution, but I don't really know much about him beyond that.
Was a Republican, so he backed the Jacobins, but that apparently didn't spare his father, who was executed and guillotined. But he had boundless ambition, the support of Carnot. General Charles Pichegru, I'm sorry, I'm butchering his name, one of the chief generals in the French Revolutionary War, is a giant schemer, and Napoleon probably ended up murdering the guy for some of his schemes, but that's later on. But anyway, Moreau was a bit of a schemer. He was a very capable commander. That said, probably be stretching it to call him some kind of genius. He did okay against Archduke Charles, and he was beaten by Suvorov. Moreau lended Napoleon a hand in his coup where he becomes consul. Because Moreau was one of the guys vying for it, but Moreau was very upset with the Directory, so he backed Napoleon, and Napoleon rewarded him with command of the Army of the Rhine. 1800 is the pivotal year for Moreau. He does win a pretty amazing victory at a battle called Hohenlinden. Ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is the decisive battle of the campaign, not Marengo.
Oh, I remember you telling me about him. Then after he won that big battle, Napoleon basically shelved him.
Yeah, to be fair to Napoleon, Moreau was a known schemer. He knew Moreau had ambitions, and he knew that Moreau was the darling of the Jacobins. Jacobins were going to try to... If the Jacobins made a move to replace Napoleon, they'd replace him with Moreau. In fact, his home became known as Club Moreau and was full of a lot of Napoleon's harshest critics. So Napoleon exiled him, and he settled in, guess where in America? Jersey.
Where?
New Jersey.
Oh, wow. That's an inspired choice.
Yeah, he lived in Jersey, man. Hey, it was a different state back then. And actually, let's be fair, guys. If you're in the middle of New Jersey, it can be very beautiful.
Yeah, I guess it's true. I guess they did call it the Garden State once upon a time.
Yeah, I know. Parts of New Jersey are gorgeous. You just got get off the turnpike. You know what I mean? But he lived in New Jersey. James Madison almost made him commander of the American troops in 1812. That'd been cool, right?
That would have been interesting.
But here's where it really gets interesting. Friend Bernadotte, who was a fellow Jacobin and one of his big supporters, Bernadotte said, "Why don't you come to help us defeat Napoleon, Russia?" So he offered his service to Tsar Alexander I, and he became an advisor to the coalition army, and he was mortally wounded at Dresden. And there's some evidence that he might have sought his death in a way because he'd become very gloomy when he realized that they weren't going to depose Napoleon and replace it with a republic like he was kind of hoping. They were going to replace him with the Bourbons. Which I'm looking at Moreau and I'm like, dude, what'd you expect? They're a bunch of fucking kings.
Yeah.
So Moreau was a schemer, but kind of a clueless schemer in some ways. Like he would make just boneheaded decisions. I think some of that might be because he was a true blue Jacobin Republican. Um, but yeah, he was a well-regarded general, known mostly for his mastery of defensive maneuvers, logistics, and his overall tactical dispositions were solid. However, he definitely wasn't some kind of genius, if you will. I'd rate him a C, personally.
Okay. I guess just by virtue of Hohenlinden, he still has a, reasonable claim to historical significance.
And I will say he's a good manager of an army. It could be argued that probably Moreau's biggest problem was that he took on Charles and Suvorov, and they are two of the best commanders of the era. I mean, Charles was one of the only ones to actually beat Napoleon in a battle, straight fight, and Suvorov is arguably Russia's greatest general.
So I guess if he had been fighting Mac and somebody like that, he might have a much better reputation.
My rules always is like sometimes a military genius is only as good as the idiot they're fighting, right?
Yeah.
My favorite one being Frederick the Great. I mean, Frederick the Great, like I think half of his victories were against Charles of Lorraine.
Also, he'd be like, he'd do scouting. Who's in command of the enemy army? Charles of Lorraine. We got this.
No, literally, he said that before one of his battles. He said, Charles is in charge, which he then said, there will be mistakes on the Austrian side.
That's great. So,
yeah, no, Charles came close to beating Frederick at Prague and Chosovitz, but otherwise, I mean, he got his ass handed to him several times. I remember one person was working on a war game, and we're working on some tactical games for horse and musket, a lot of Frederick the Great stuff. Well, and one of the people working on the game saw Charles's name. She said, "Oh my God, this guy again." And then she's like, "Didn't the Austrians know to give up on him?"
I guess not.
Yeah, I rank him as one of the 10 worst generals in history.
Yeah, so I guess Austria didn't change a hell of a lot though, because in the Napoleonic period, didn't they have a bunch of graybeards around, and sometimes they'd keep these guys around even after they had failed. I mean, with the exception of Charles, and I guess they had another guy later in the war, Schwarzenberg, whatever his name was. But other than that, did they really have any competent officers?
Oh no, definitely. They had a mix. They had some pretty good officers. Actually, a lot of the generals that Napoleon fought in Italy were decent. The 1796 Italian campaign, he actually fought some decent enemies. One of them he actually respected was Wurmser. Because even though Wurmser would make mistakes, Napoleon respected the fact that Wurmser was a tough fighter. So it did have some decent generals in 1796, which makes the campaign all the more impressive in my opinion. One of the problems the Austrians had, though, was so much backbiting within the army, and their quality of soldiers in 1796 varied a lot. Now, Charles of Lorraine, and I know we're derailing talking about Frederick the Great in the 7 Years' War, Charles of Lorraine was not a graybeard. He owed his position to the fact that when Maria Theresa became empress, he backed her enthusiastically with no reservations, and he remained optimistic when others were gloomy or calling for peace.
Huh.
So he had family connections, and within court, did exactly what he needed to do to win her confidence, for her to really like him. To be fair to Charles of Lorraine, after the War of the Austrian Succession, he actively supported the reforms that made the Austrian army competitive. And I will say this, man, the Austrian army of the 7 Years' War was good. I think one of the only reasons that they lost the war was because they were fighting Frederick the Great. But they probably would have beat up any other army they would have fought against. And to be fair, they beat Frederick on several occasions. So the Austrian army in the 7 Years' War, I give a lot of props. It was very good military they had at that point.
Oh.
And to Charles Lorraine, to his credit, he actively supported the reforms, made the army good. He just shouldn't have been in charge. That's all.
Yeah.
I guess it's an example of that too is the Duke of York, who was one of the British generals of this era. Awful army commander, terrible tactician, but when they made him head of the British Army, he oversaw reforms administration. Excellent at the job.
So I guess he understood the theory better than the practice.
Yeah, I mean, he understood he understood good officers. He understood training and tactics, at least like doctrine, if you will, ways to improve the army, and the theory, if you will. So when the British put the Duke of York in charge of the army, he did excellent. But, on a battlefield, no, he's terrible. But, know where your strengths are, right? Like Berthier, Napoleon's chief of staff. Superb as a chief of staff. Bad as a military commander. I mean, bad as an independent commander. Probably wouldn't be able to command a division either. So know where your guy's supposed to be, man. I mean, John Bell Hood, great fighter, horrible administrator. Yeah, complicated guys, man. But anyway, who's next on our thing?
Next up is Jean Romp.
Romp. Romp was a member of Napoleon's staff. He's German, though. Get this, son of a janitor, essentially.
Huh.
Yeah. But anyway, he decided to go the military life. He was legendarily brave, serving the staff of Desaix, and captured a battery of artillery. Napoleon was very impressed by him, so he joined Napoleon's staff after Desaix died. Napoleon would give him random assignments because Napoleon's staff had a lot of fascinating and very dynamic figures on it. Rapp is definitely one of them. So, for instance, he was given a force of cavalry at Austerlitz, and he managed to pierce the line. So Napoleon would kind of be like, okay, if a corps commander was down or he needed somebody somewhere on the quick, he'd be like, Rapp, go take care of this. Also wounded several times. Almost gives Oudinot a run for his money.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at Jena was his 9th wound. Was at Jena. How do you like that, huh? But anyway, very, very good. Oh, he helped fight in the rear guard along with Ney and Victor, so he's part of that group as well. In 1815, he rallied to Napoleon, and Napoleon, at that time, he doesn't have a big pool of talent. He gave Rapp his own command. Rapp won a small battle at La Soufflée, which is the last major battle of the Napoleonic Wars.
That's the most French-sounding battle of all time.
Yeah, La Soufflée or something. I'm butchering the name here. It's named after a small river that's nearby.
Oh, I mean, if it is La Soufflée, I mean, that definitely sounds like some sort of dish you would order, an appetizer.
Yeah, I'd give Rapp a B. He didn't really show himself to be a particularly brilliant commander, but very good, intelligent, brave. And Napoleon's trust is such in Rapp that he gave him an independent in 1815, essentially his own army.
Oh yeah, that would be a good Forgotten Battles episode, by the way. The last battle in the Napoleonic Wars. I
know you've mentioned it, but it just doesn't matter though. Those guys died in vain.
Yeah, but I mean, it is an interesting tidbit, and it's also the first time that Romp got to stop being the super aide de camp and actually got to command something.
He commanded other things as well. Like he led troops and he led division in the Russian campaign, I believe. So he had quite a bit of experience.
Yeah.
Anyway, now our next guy is Jean Renee.
Yes.
Yeah, this guy's one of those real Hellraiser types. He was a good artillery and commander and a good staff officer as well. He commanded a division under Napoleon in Egypt. But Napoleon didn't bring him with him when he left Egypt. To be fair, he didn't bring a lot of guys with him because there's only so many men he can fit on a boat. They killed a fellow general in a duel. Like that, huh?
Yeah, I like this guy.
He was many people consider him morally repulsive, but he had ironclad loyalty to Napoleon. So Napoleon kept him in command. He led a division under Massena in 1805. Did very well there. And he smashed the Neapolitan army, which, to be fair, is not the finest army in Europe, but hey, he was outnumbered, so victory's a victory. That said, he was defeated by the British at Mahdia, which is in southern Italy. This is one of the first clear-cut defeats Napoleon suffers. Now, it's not a particularly big defeat, but it should be noted that the British system of beating the French was already being set up by that time. That being said, in both Italy and in Spain, he was known for being very brutal. Okay. Um, and he also didn't do too well. So he commanded the Saxons in the Russian invasion. His health was slipping up, and he really bad at Grossbeeren, and his corps collapsed at Dennowitz completely. So Saxons then deserted him at Leipzig. So you can tell the German campaign, to be fair, he's leading Saxon troops, so he's not in the best of positions. I don't know, he's aggressive, hard marcher, very good in attack, good at artillery, but also a plunderer with loose morals, penchant for cruelty. And he didn't do too well as the wars went on. He was also getting up in age as well. Probably a D, I would say.
Yeah, sounds like he did more harm than good in the German campaign. Even
Yeah,
though,
I mean,
it wasn't a great position to be in, sure, but having a whole corps collapse is something that Napoleon couldn't really afford when he's facing the coalition, and he's outnumbered, 2-1 overall?
yeah, and did twice. His corps collapsed at Dennowitz, and then Leipzig, it practically melts desserts. So tough positions he was in for sure. Tough character in many ways. I gotta go the D, yeah.
All right. How about our next gentleman, who unfortunately the picture cut his head off, Jacques Lauriston?
Lauriston, do you know much about him in particular?
Nothing.
Nothing about Lauriston?
No.
Lauriston's kind of interesting. He was actually classmates with Napoleon.
Oh, at Brienne Military Academy?
Yeah, but they weren't. I don't know if it was at Brienne or it might have been at the actual artillery school that Napoleon went to later on. But he's one of Bonaparte's first acquaintances. But I wouldn't call him a friend. Now, he wasn't excited about the revolution, so he kind of just had minor postings, mostly staff stuff. Napoleon, though, enticed him to return in 1800, where he did serve on Napoleon's staff. Maybe he remembered him fondly at school, if you will. And it should be noted, there's actually Lauriston for a time commanded the artillery school, one of them at least. He was known for his diplomatic duties. He did them in Denmark, Britain, and then later on in Russia in 1812. Anyway, he was given a division in 1805, did pretty well. Napoleon kind of used him as a guy who would either command a division or a corps, but he would also use him for diplomatic missions. One of your French generals who seems to have some diplomatic savvy. He was given a corps in the German campaign, and he kind of hit and miss. He did well at Lutzen, but not at Bautzen. And he embraced the Bourbons in 1814 and stayed loyal to them the entire time. Even commanded the Royal Guard at some point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, the Bourbons loved him so much. He got a marshal's baton. He became an honorary member of the nobility, I guess you would say. Corps command seemed to be above his head, if you will. He was a pretty good diplomat. It appears, though, he's one of these figures during this time who is definitely not acting out of ideals, but purely out of self-interest. Probably got to go the D for him as well.
Okay. I think there's another person on this list who got a marshal's baton from the Bourbons as well, right? Or at least one more person.
I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe DuPont.
Okay, because I know when I was looking these guys up and putting this tier list together, I did glance at some of their profiles, and I think a couple of them were given batons at a later date. I think we'll probably see this happen a couple more times. All right.
Yeah, first,
go ahead.
Doesn't have marshals for, do they?
I don't think so. I think they had marshals up until World War II, though.
Yeah, but they got to bring that back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess Pétain, siding with the Nazis, or at least seeming to, that kind of killed the whole marshal thing.
Fuck that. Do you think one? And well, I say one rotten apple. I mean, he did win his marshal's baton. He did really well for Dunn, right? But I mean, you think like one guy making a major mistake supposed to ruin all this stuff, man? Come on.
Yeah, especially one guy who's already in his 80s and may have had dementia. But anyway,
Yeah, he may have. And it's crazy how long he lived. You know what one of my favorite baton stories though is? He was kind of an old man even in World War One, right?
yeah, he had already retired. He came back to service, which actually wasn't super uncommon for a lot of those World War One generals. A lot of them had been retired a few years and they were recalled.
I think quick aside about Pétain. Pétain was fascinating before World War One because he was of the firepower school, right? And he actually wrote, I believe it might have been a book. He definitely wrote some essays where the Napoleonic Wars and said Napoleon didn't win through elan and bayonet charges. He won through firepower.
Huh.
So he was part of he's part of a reassessment of the Napoleonic Wars. Pétain's one of them. Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to talk about his politics, but on a purely general level, Pétain is one of France's finest commanders. One of
They
his best
shall not pass.
Yes, they shall not pass. That's where the Gandalf line comes from.
Yeah.
The fun fact with Pétain, when they went to Paris to say knock on his door and be like, "You're back in command," he was with his mistress.
That sounds right.
Good man, good man.
I remember reading a biography of him. Apparently, he was rejected by the woman of his dreams, and after that, he basically became kind of a wild man.
Yeah. There's other accounts of guys like that. They're just like, wait, I can't have the woman I want. Well, I guess I'll just stick my dick in anything, right?
Make up for it with quantity. Eventually, it will add up. The math works.
But didn't Stalin say quantity has a quality all of its own?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is a certain logic to that.
Speaking of men who put their dick in anything, LaSalle is our next
Yeah,
guy.
Antoine LaSalle, who kind of has a little bit of the porn stash going on in this picture.
Which makes perfect sense. Do you know much about LaSalle?
I know that when I've read accounts of Napoleonic campaigns, his name has come up, but I don't really remember much about him.
Yeah, he's a very, very dynamic guy. Kind of considered like the prototypical hussar, light cavalryman. He'd do some staff officer work. He was cultured and witty. He had to maintain this. He had a swaggering air about him, pure fighter, if you will. And one of his obsessions was anytime they go to a country, he had to sleep with a foreign woman.
So he's a collector.
He is. He's a drunkard as well.
So he'd be like one of those guys if he lived today. Anytime he flew a new airline, he'd have to join the Mile High Club on that particular airline.
Another good thing about him too, he famously said, if you're not dead before, if you're a hussar and you're not dead before you're 30, you're what he called a black dog. Yeah.
But I'm guessing he lived to be more than 30.
LaSalle to me LaSalle reminds me of Seydlitz, who was Sergeant the Great's famed cavalry commander, in that both of them were like, they're drinkers, they're womanizers, they have a devil-may-care attitude, but they do take their job seriously. Okay? So in Napoleon's case, at first he thought LaSalle was just like silly, until he saw him in action, Ollie in the pyramid. And Napoleon was like, this guy is one of the best I have. And he is. Now, he was not really given massive commands, actually, which of all the guys we have on this list, he was the one who had the smallest command. He was given the elite of the light cavalry. Probably his most famous thing was when he bluffed 10,000 Prussians at Stettin to surrender to his 500 hussar.
Damn.
He bluffed. Yeah. There's one account where one of these cities that he helped capture. I think it might have been Stettin, where he actually he snuck inside, slept with a local woman, and then opened the gates up.
Wow.
So I don't think they wanted to make him a higher ranking commander because, he wasn't considered a good role model and he might not have been very good at administration, but what he was given, he did superbly. He also started the Society of Alcoholics.
Wow.
But at Wagram, he died attempting to pursue the Austrians. there are a number of people who said that his death represented the death of not only the dominance of the French cavalry, but of that kind of Napoleonic confidence in battle, which he very much epitomized.
So I guess when he was sleeping with the one woman before he captured the city, if his troops had asked one of the senior officers, "Where's General Lasalle?" "He's working on capturing the city, one stroke at a time."
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit hard to rate him, and in some ways now I feel kind of bad that I put him on this list because, he didn't really go beyond. He barely commanded more than a brigade, but he's so interesting. He's so entertaining, and his command does so well. He's given a lot of times the toughest assignments. It's hard to rate him, but I'll go with a B because I have major questions about whether he could have commanded anything more than a division.
Yeah, but I mean, no shame in commanding a division. Somebody's got to do it, and if you're good at it, well, then that is still pretty damn useful.
It is, man.
All right.
Our next guy is the opposite of LaSalle. He's one of the frumpier ones.
Louis Friant.
Louis Friant. Actually a grenadier in the Royal Guard. French Royal Guard before the Revolution. Strict disciplinarian, hard fighting, marching, very brave. Got wounded a lot as well. He fought both in Italy and Egypt. He wasn't considered particularly bright, though, so it's kind of interesting. Like, Napoleon would have him be like Inspector General of Infantry because he's so strict disciplinarian. And he was his friend and brother-in-law of Davout. And so he commands a division which is sometimes considered like the best division in the entire army. His most famous feat was having his division march 70 miles in 36 hours to reach Austerlitz. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's hard to name a battle where he does poorly. But it seems that Napoleon Davout thought that his intelligence was a bit limited, if you will. So they would keep him in command of divisions, and he does end up commanding the Old Guard. So it's kind of weird. On the one hand, who was on the older side? I'm sorry, not Davout. I mean, Friant was on the older side. In fact, he was 47 at Austerlitz, as my notes say. And rough manners, and there were some questions about his intelligence. But that said, if you asked just about anybody who's the best division commander of this army, his name would be, if not the first one, it's like the second or third.
I see.
I don't know how he would have done in Corps Command, but I think my highest ranking for any of these guys who didn't make Corps is going to be a B, and I give him a B.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen his name before, but he's not somebody I've ever looked up. All right. So next up, we have someone who is very interesting. His name is Jean-Andoche Junot.
Yeah, Junot, he's one of your faves, right?
Yeah, I mean, he has a badass nickname, the Hurricane.
He does. What a great name, man.
Yeah. The main thing I know about him is that I believe it was when France initially intervened in Spain, he marched unopposed through Spain to occupy Lisbon, and just the march itself almost destroyed his force. I believe he set out with, 17 to 20,000 men. By the time he actually got to Lisbon, he only had about 1,500 effectives, and most of the rest of his men were stragglers. So if he had met any opposition at all towards the end, he would have been defeated.
Yeah.
I think it's just sort of a testament to how difficult it was for foreign armies to march through Iberia. That being said, too, he also apparently had some severe issues relating to a gunshot wound to the head.
Yeah, he suffered it at the Battle of Lonato, which is one of the early battles in the Italian campaign. Now, before that, I mean, Junot was one of the only guys to serve, one of the few men on either list to serve with Napoleon at Toulon. So he was a shoo-in to serve on his staff. Um, Captured during the Egyptian campaign, but of course that horrible head wound, right? And apparently it didn't manifest itself at first, but eventually it did, right? So what happened, Derek, when that head wound started to, pop up?
Well, apparently, whatever town he was garrisoning was horrified when General Junot decided to take his clothes off and parade through the streets.
Yeah, there we go. We have a nudist, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. And I guess this
Well,
is
the other
also it's
problem-
also worth noting that Spain was pretty socially conservative at this time and very Catholic, so this
Yeah.
was not like doing this in Paris or somewhere like that.
One of his other problems he had too was he had an extravagant life, spent money all the time. He went into debt a lot. His wife was actually a harsh critic of Napoleon. So even though he was friends with Napoleon, when I say friends with Napoleon, was the kind of guy if you said a bad word about Napoleon, he would like draw a knife on you, unless he's having sex with you, right?
I mean, to be fair though, that exception often does apply. So.
Oh, he did have an affair with Caroline Bonaparte, which probably upset Napoleon. So Napoleon starts to see him as kind of erratic, if you will. And even though he serves on Napoleon's staff and does various administrative duties, he was not made a marshal. That really upset Junot about it. It's very much like, dude, what are you doing, man? I'm like your bro, right? So you're talking about the March to Vimeiro. Apparently one of the points of Junot going to Portugal and conquering Portugal was that if he had done well, he was going to get the baton. That was kind of understood.
So you think he overextended and marched his men almost out of existence?
And then was beaten at Vimeiro, where he had to surrender. Although he managed to get good terms for his men. He did lead Jerome's corps in Russia once Jerome left. And this is really when Napoleon started to notice and be like, Junot is losing it. Mentioned the Spanish thing. Apparently he paraded naked in the streets in Illyria as well.
Oh.
Yeah. It's apparently committed suicide. There is a New Orleans legend, though, that he escaped to this city because he had some of his family here.
Oh.
I'm not saying he did, though. I'm just saying it's a New Orleans legend that Junot escaped to the city.
So if he survived his head wound for a number of years, it's also possible that his eventual mental breakdown was not due to the gunshot wound, but rather just stress and, what we now call PTSD.
It's possible. It would appear that he suffered this head wound. You don't know it'll really manifest itself, but it will manifest itself under stress.
Yeah, I guess it's also possible, a lot of boxers suffer head wounds when they're young, and then 20 or more years might pass before it really starts to affect them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Feel bad for Junot in that regard. And you can even see in the erratic behavior, the extravagance, the affairs, the gambling. Not too many advantages with him. Probably an E.
Yeah, he's got one of the more dramatic portraits in that Jacques Louis David style of the dark background, the romantic art.
Yeah, no, his portrait is one of the best. I'd also add that Junot is, we're talking about the guys who are really fascinating in this list. Moreau, Jean Moreau, Dumas. They're among some of the most Laurie. Those amongst the fast in this list, and Junot is definitely up there. LaSalle. So
with Junot, where did he earn his nickname, the Hurricane? What happened to give him that?
I don't know exactly. I had.
Okay. So I was thinking, like, maybe was there some battle where he just delivered, like, some devastating flank attack, or was it just because he was a wild man, or, like, what's...
I think it's because he was a wild man.
Yeah.
What I think it was. Oh, up next, another wild man.
All right.
Kleber.
Yeah, Jean-Baptiste Kleber.
Studies an architect before the war. Fun thing, he helped two German nobles during a tavern brawl. They, as a favor to him, placed him in a military school. And I believe in the Austrian military, he was like a low-ranking officer, but he kind of figured out that promotion beyond a certain rank was never going to happen. Disgusted by that. So he was an early advocate of the revolution. He served in a variety of roles. He was at the Battle of Fleury, for instance. So he's considered one of France's finest battlefield generals. So he joins Napoleon on the Egyptian campaign. Napoleon acknowledged that Kleber was one of the most skilled commanders he had, but Kleber hates Bonaparte. One of the fun things is he actually drew cartoons that mocked Napoleon. One of my favorite quotes about Napoleon, where he said that Napoleon was the kind of commander who needed an income of a few thousand soldiers a month. Referring to the losses that would pile up in his style of warfare.
Damn.
Napoleon left him in Egypt.
Didn't he leave him as the commander?
He left him as the commander in Egypt. He actually did win a major victory, but then was murdered. The guy who murdered him, by the way, was then self-executed, and his skull was sent to be studied by French medical students. Apparently to look for the bump of crime and fanaticism.
You're gonna say the bump of the betrayer or something like that.
Yeah, some stuff like that. It should be noted that he was buried in an island because he was such a hero to the Republicans. Napoleon was afraid that his body would become the shrine, but he does have an elaborate tomb and monument that are in Strasbourg. My take on Napoleon with Kleber is a little different. So people say, like, oh, he left him there because he was a rival and he hated Napoleon. I'm like, that's part of it. But I think Napoleon wanted to get back to Egypt. I mean, he sent troops and supplies there until the place fell. So Napoleon didn't abandon the men in Egypt and say, later, guys, fuck off. He did try to support them. And I think he left Kleber there because he wanted to do two things at once. He wanted to make sure Kleber wasn't in France to mess with him, while at the same time making sure Egypt had a commander who was good and knew what he was doing. And to his credit, Kleber did very well when left on his own in Egypt. I'd give him an A.
All right. Makes sense to me. I guess, although he's listed as one of Napoleon's generals here, somebody who, under other circumstances, probably would have overthrown Napoleon and ended or prevented there ever being a Napoleonic era.
Possible, man. But keep in mind, too, a lot of these guys Napoleon did reconcile with, or would have some reconciliation with, like MacDonald on the other list.
Right.
So, I mean, it could have happened. Kleber could have been like, Napoleon's fine. I don't think so, though.
Yeah. I guess, too, Kleber would have had somewhat limited political purchase, given that he was a German with some Austrian links. So he might not have been fully trusted in, say, a position of very high power.
That is becoming more of an issue at this time as nationalism is being born. But remember back when we had to read that book, Imagine Communities?
Oh, yeah. Benedict Anderson. Yeah.
I remember you did not like that book, man. You ripped that one apart.
Yeah, well, I remember there was something in it where the guy said something to the effect of, I forget what the claim was. Anyway, it was something that completely contradicted anything in ancient history in reality. He made this broad sweeping claim that was completely incorrect.
It was pretty silly. My big one in class was his explanation was that, language is what created nationalism. I'm like, yeah, it plays a part, but another important one is that there's no longer a king.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, it's interesting. My current advisor is actually a huge fan of Imagine Communities. We had that discussion once.
How'd that go?
That went all right. I mean, yeah, he's pretty cool. He's okay with people disagreeing with him. I think he kind of enjoys it because then there's more back and forth.
Yeah, as long as it's I can definitely see that. I kind of feel the same way, man. Back and forth is good. But now we've got one of your favorites of the era.
Oh yeah, we have Dominique Renee Van Damme.
Yeah.
A guy who just kind of exudes a bully facade.
does, man. Described by somebody as a plunderer on par with the pirates of the high seas or something. I've heard that said about him. No problem using brutal methods. Love loot, but his leadership style and his bravery made him beloved by the men. I like that Napoleon quote. If I had two of you, the only solution would be to have one hang the other.
Didn't he also say that if he ever invaded hell, he would appoint Van Damme the head of the vanguard?
Correct, man. My favorite Van Damme story was his worst moment comes after Dresden when he's told to pursue and he's defeated at Kulm. Now, his defeat at Kulm is not entirely his fault. He doesn't get proper support. But either way, it's a major defeat. And I would say is one of the most important battles of the wars because Napoleon could have pulled off thorough pursuit after Dresden. That could have turned the tide of the campaign. Because Dresden was already a pretty big victory, should be noted. Dresden is a major Napoleonic victory, but the pursuit fails, and that cancels it out. But I love, he's brought before Tsar Alexander I, who mentioned like his penchant for plunder, and Van Damme said, I am neither a plunderer nor a brigand, but in any case, my contemporaries in history will not reproach me for having soaked my hands in the blood of my father, which is an allusion to the murder of Tsar Alexander's father, Tsar Paul I. Dude, think about that. You're brought before
that's crazy. Also, Alexander was a child when that happened, right? I mean, so there's no way he did it.
No, he wasn't a child. He didn't orchestrate it, but let's say he didn't necessarily punish everybody who took part.
Oh.
Yeah. But I kind of have a soft spot for Tsar Paul I. I think he's an interesting guy. I view Tsar Paul I as kind of a Caligula figure, a little bit unhinged, but probably his biggest sin was that he pissed off some nobles.
Yeah, I mean, you can piss off some nobles, but you need to have other nobles on your side. If you piss them all off...
One of the nobles that Paul did have on his side was Kutuzov, which is why Alexander and Kutuzov did not like each other. There was a lot of tension between those two. But yeah, Kutuzov's a different story. But anyway, so Van Damme, I mean, he commanded a corps, did well at Ligny, and he commanded the troops. It probably would have been better if he had been in Waterloo, but he wasn't. His corps was off chasing the Prussians. Should be noted that he was the one really telling Grouchy, like, hey, let's go march to Waterloo. He was the one giving more aggressive advice. Oh, by the way, did live in America for a time.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So is that during the time when he filmed Bloodsport, or was that later?
No, it was when he did Hard Target, which was filmed in New Orleans, right?
I've never heard of Hard Target. I got to look that up.
Oh, you never heard of Hard Target? Oh my God, it is so fucking terrible. Like, the Van Damme movie, what's mostly known for online is the clip where Van Damme punches a snake. You ever seen that?
No, I've never seen that.
Oh, Van Damme like has a snake in his hands. He punches it, and the snake like deflates because it's a rubber snake, right?
So it's equivalent to Jaws: The Revenge, where the boat like hits a shark and it explodes.
Something like that. It's something just absolutely ridiculous,
Jesus.
Oh, Philadelphia. He lived in Philly.
Oh, okay.
So no, Van Damme. Got any other thoughts on General Van Damme?
Seems like a sort of if you had to find an example of a sort of Bravo style general, a guy who can lead troops, likes to kick ass, but maybe beyond that, there's not a lot there. I feel like maybe he's sort of the go-to example.
Yeah, no, he's definitely an ass kicker, but not much else. I give him a C.
Okay. Alright, so that was Van Damme. Let's see, who's next? We have Joseph Bonaparte, the older brother of Napoleon. Yeah,
you have some opinions on him. I have some opinions on him. How about you go first?
So most of what I know about Joseph comes from his time as King of Spain, where he also was serving as Commander-in-Chief of Spain, but it was understood all the troops were actually Napoleon's, and that some of the marshals would have some independent jurisdictions. It was a very odd arrangement for anybody to have to manage. So for Joseph, he had Jourdan, the marshal, as his chief of staff. but it looks like he left a lot of that to Jourdan, but maybe didn't enforce his will on the other marshals when Jourdan would urge him to do one thing or another. So there was some command confusion. Partly that's because Joseph doesn't really seem to have a military mind at all. But he's sort of trying to coordinate all these armies, but it's not really something he has any ability to do. And for some reason, his brother didn't just give supreme command to Jourdan or one of these other guys just to simplify things. So Joseph is forced to participate in this process. He's also a foreign monarch. He seems to do about as well as he could have in trying to ingratiate the Spanish people. But again, he's not fully in charge because a lot of these generals can kind of do what they want. He can issue orders, but they may or may not be followed. And he also didn't want to be there. He also apparently had other career interests before his brother became, a huge figure in France and later becomes emperor. And then he's kind of dragged into the family business of wearing a crown, something that he was not super interested in. Although he had some traits that could work for a ruler, maybe of a small country that is fairly peaceful. Like if he had been king of Switzerland, he'd probably done pretty well. But he is not suited for a war-torn country or any kind of military command.
Yeah, he did do well as king of Naples, which he reluctantly gave up that crown for the Spanish one. I think one of his lines is he told Napoleon, Spain will be a tomb or something like that. Oh, yeah, your glory will be shipwrecked in Spain. My tomb will be a monument to your lack of power to support me. He loved Italy, though, by the way. In fact, that's where he died. Oh, he did live in America as well. He lived in Jersey. I talked to a guy who actually... there was actually a cave that he used to visit, which was near Joseph's old home there. One thing is interesting about Joseph... I think it's underrated is that Joseph was important to Napoleon's early rise because he was a politician. And so he was able to secure supplies and reinforcements for Napoleon, give him political aid, but his main aid was diplomacy. He was actually a pretty good diplomat, and he had a lot of intellectual friends. So Joseph won over segments of the French intelligentsia, if you will, over to his cause. So I think of Joseph, let's say he had died while he was king of Spain, before he was king of Spain, he'd be very much better remembered. I really think it's unfair that he's considered like this bumbling brother. Definitely not a genius. He doesn't have killer instinct. He's best in a salon or in the diplomatic room. I think you said it best when you said he probably made a very good king of a small, peaceful country. That said, he wasn't a terrible strategist, I must say. Some of his overall strategic plans were pretty good. I think he had an overall grasp of strategy and definitely grand strategy. But on the battlefield, not capable of decisive action, not a military man. And he definitely did some interference in 1809 that cost the French victory at Talavera. Him and Jourdan definitely played a part. He didn't do too well in 1814 when he was in Paris. He didn't handle the political situation very well. We have to rate him purely on military ability. We're not rating him as like a diplomat or a person who went over intellectuals. Militarily, got to go with an E.
So an E not enough?
Yeah. I think he had some actual gifts and strategy.
Okay. That makes sense. He just seems like... I don't think he had any real training or experience, though, right? He was just kind of a complete novice.
He's essentially in the family. When they were younger, Joseph was very smart, and he kind of seen as like the brightest prospect. He was intelligent, very well read. He's a cultured man. And he was getting involved in politics, and he was pretty good at politics. That was where his politics, intellectual pursuits, diplomacy, those are his strong suits. That's those are really Joseph's strong suits. Napoleon put him in a position in Spain that he just wasn't able to handle. Now, to his credit, he did win over some of the Spanish middle class, what was there at least. He didn't show a lot of financial skill in Spain. You know, he was never really a great financier or anybody. He's not a detail guy, that's for sure. I go with an E. I don't want to go with an F.
Okay, I'm guessing you might be saving the F for someone else. I
know who I'm saving it for.
All right.
I know who's getting an F.
Yeah, I have a feeling he's coming up soon. So there's another brother of Napoleon, Jerome Bonaparte, possibly the most notorious member of the family in some ways.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, fun facts about Jerome. He was the youngest of Bonaparte's siblings and his favorite, personally. At least when they were younger. So Jerome really liked Napoleon back then, too, to the point where he served in the precursor of the Imperial Guard, the Consular Guard, at least until he fought a duel with Vu's brother and lost.
Mm.
He was sent to the Caribbean, where he abandoned his post, went to Baltimore, and married an American woman. Napoleon, though, prevented that marriage, and I believe that is really where the two divided. Before that, Napoleon's like, oh, Jerome's my favorite, he's a good guy, and then after that, I think the two cannot be really reconciled. But, you know, Jerome served in the Navy for a time, eventually became a corps commander, having no qualifications for it, but Napoleon kind of understood that, so he mostly gave him minor positions. He then becomes head of Württemberg. I'm sorry, no, King of Westphalia, my bad. Westphalia, which is an amalgamation of some German principalities, because, you know, Napoleon ended the Holy Roman Empire. Because Napoleon's the kind of guy who says, like, wait, why do we have this thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jerome was very much a court guy. He was lush life, lots of fine food, chasing women. Probably one of his best things he's known for is being a supporter of the arts. But, you know, he commanded a corps in the 1809 German campaign. There was nearly a mutiny due to his incompetence. Here's where it gets really bad. Even though Napoleon has lots of evidence that Jerome's not very good in the Russian invasion, he gives him the 8th Corps and some major responsibilities that he fumbles. Now, the degree to which is Jerome's fault can be debated, but it's pretty clear that he was out of his element. Now, for the Waterloo campaign, he rallied to Napoleon, so Napoleon gave him command of a division at Waterloo. Completely bungled that as well. I don't know, man. It's kind of hard to rate him. Fun fact, though, he's the one who became a marshal because of Napoleon III.
Oh, he's still alive at that time.
Yeah, I mean, he died 1860. I mean, he was a very young man. He lived long. He was a very young man during the Napoleonic Wars, that is. But yeah, under Napoleon III, he was not only made a marshal, he was also named Napoleon III's heir for a time and president of the Senate.
Damn.
Yeah, he probably was a bit more effective under Napoleon III, that's for sure. But
yeah, so I didn't realize he had held so many commands. I assumed that he was kind of just a dissolute who fucked around. I had no idea that he had actually at least tried to command troops.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, his grandson served in the U.S. Secretary of the Navy and Attorney General.
Really? When was that?
Late 1800s.
Oh, okay. I had no idea. That's
yeah. So no, he is interesting. Jerome is in many ways. He had a very interesting career, and he himself seems like he would have been a perfectly fine and fun guy, but he wasn't meant to be commanding troops, and he probably wasn't meant to be ruling a country either. I give him an F. What do you think?
He sounds like a good candidate for an F. I mean, if F stands for failure, I mean, he pretty much failed at all his endeavors during this time, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
I mean, that's an easy F. I don't know how else to put it.
I mean, there's Louis Bonaparte, who was king of the Netherlands, and he wasn't great or anything, but he did pretty well. And Louis was pretty close to Napoleon during the beginning of the Revolution. Louis was the one who was closer to Napoleon. Jerome got closer to Napoleon by the early 1800s, you know?
Yeah, I would have to say, though, I do side with Jerome on the marriage issue.
Yes, definitely. That was a dick move by Napoleon.
Yeah, it was. But other than that, it sounds like Jerome wanted to be in the family business. He just didn't really have the skill. He was kind of what's that guy from the Godfather movies, who, like the incompetent son or brother?
Fredo?
Yeah, he was the Fredo of the Bonaparte family.
Yeah, I guess, man. I mean, here's the thing about Fredo, though. If you look watching the Godfather thing, it's not that Fredo is necessarily incompetent. They eventually give him jobs he's not bad at. You know, they're just not high ranking jobs. Get what I mean?
So it's kind of like where Saddam Hussein had his oldest son heading the Olympic Committee.
Yeah, like some shit like that. So like if you look at the Godfather movies, like Fredo's pretty good at like, you know, running nightclubs. Knows Las Vegas really well. He's good at arranging parties and whatnot. So he's good at that kind of stuff, right? The problem with Fredo is Fredo wanted to do more. He wanted to be more, and he was the older brother too. You know. I say that because you know Jerome might have been pretty good at running a nightclub. You know.
Yeah, maybe that was his real calling. He just never got a chance.
Yeah, but unfortunately, you know, Napoleon Bonaparte decided to make Fredo one of his top enforcers. That's what it's like, you know.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's funny. You know, poor Jerome never got a chance to pursue his true passion of running a nightclub. Instead, he was forced to wear a crown and command a corps. I feel bad for him.
He got to live it up though, man. I mean, he had post, in some ways you could say post Waterloo, and definitely later in his life, he had a pretty good run, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Jerome for you.
All right. Well, our next gentleman is Henry Bertrand.
Henri Bertrand. Bertrand is kind of like lesser Jean Romp. You will, like, how can I say this? Like, he was member of Napoleon's staff, and he would sometimes be given important duties, like if you need to fill in for something, right? So, for instance, in 1813, he commands 4th Corps, which is composed of French, Italian, and German units. He was pretty unimpressive in a series of battles. He did well enough at Leipzig. He kept the escape route open when the Austrians tried to close it. He joined Napoleon in exile at Saint-Hilaire. And he played an important role in getting people to be sympathetic to Napoleon on Saint-Hilaire and in the return of Napoleon's body. So, of course, he's actually buried next to near Napoleon, one of the few guys on this list. Brave in battle, accomplished engineer and administrator, but corps command was probably above his abilities. So, kind of like Romp, it's kind of interesting. Napoleon would give Jean Romp like divisions, and then he gave him corps, and he did well, right? I feel like Bertrand, he probably gave him too much responsibility too fast. He was an important member of the staff, though. I'd probably go with a D.
Okay.
And the picture you have for him is him in later life.
Oh, okay.
He actually did become a high-ranking French officer later on.
Did he get to be a marshal, or?
No, I don't think he did. But interesting thing, he did meet with General Henry Halleck of the Civil War. They became friends.
Did he enter into the Halleck circle, or was he more of an outside member?
Yeah, definitely an insider. Well, Halleck arrived in France. Bertrand met with him, and of course, Halleck was like, "Oh my God, this guy served with Napoleon," you know. And Bertrand immediately saw Halleck as a very talented engineer and allowed him to learn French engineering methods and actually tour the country as well.
Huh.
Yeah, so interesting little Napoleonic connection there. Yeah, they got along pretty well, actually.
So Bertrand had been a little younger. Maybe he would have found himself in command of a Union army, because Halleck, always made sure his friends were rewarded. So.
Yeah, and some of that. By the way, I just read a Halleck biography, and I had some problems with it. But I also feel that Halleck was not just rewarding like friends, because Halleck wasn't a very super social guy. I think he was also rewarding people that he thought were competent who happened to also be his friends. You know.
That makes
But anyway,
sense.
we're not going to get into the Halleck thing here, you know. But anyway, yeah. So Bertrand, pretty interesting guy, played a very important role in Napoleon's memory, especially post Saint-Hilaire, post death. You know.
Right. Well, our next gentleman has a rather complex name. His name is Jean-Baptiste Drew, Comte d'Erlon.
Oh, d'Erlon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Veteran of the Royalist Army, one of Massena's guys, like one of his friends, and he fought pretty well at Austerlitz. Also served at Lefebvre. He was friends with him and served as chief of staff. So in many ways, Lefebvre's brains. Because remember, Lefebvre was the kind of guy who would ram his head through a wall. In fact, Mickey all but said that one time, you know? When Lefebvre failed, d'Erlon's best service was suppressing the uprising in Tyrol, which is spelled Tyrol. It's in the Alps. Napoleon seems to have been so happy with his success here that he kind of ignored the fact that d'Erlon didn't do very well in Spain when he was sent there. And at Waterloo, he commanded one of Napoleon's biggest corps in the Waterloo campaign and did very poorly. d'Erlon, it should be noted, too, is a bit older than some of these other guys. I don't have a very high opinion of him. I give him a D, really. I did pretty well at Tyrol. If it wasn't for Tyrol, I'd probably be just saying like more like an E.
All right. Fair enough. Our next gentleman is Charles Leclerc.
Oh, Leclerc. I know a little bit about Leclerc. He was one of Napoleon's early friends, member of his staff. He married one of his sisters. That's right, Pauline, the promiscuous one.
Oh.
Leclerc played a prominent role in Napoleon's coup in 1790. He was one of the guys who helped disperse the Council of 500. And Leclerc probably would have become a marshal. He's married to Napoleon's family. He's an accomplished staff officer. Napoleon gave him the task of reconquering Haiti. In Haiti, he was one of those guys who, kind of like Thomas Gage in America, where he kind of went from being very lenient to very brutal. And not a lot of consistency in how he's handling things. Also, the army, as you know, got really sick, and a lot of guys died of yellow fever, including Leclerc. You know? Pauline was known for being promiscuous, but apparently it was a love match. When he died, she really threw herself into riding the pole. If you, to be fair to her, she was very distraught by his death. Now, here's a fun fact about that. So distraught by his death that she started sleeping with a guy named Jean Humbert, one of the generals in Haiti. And Humbert realized he was in trouble because he's sleeping with Napoleon's sister, whose husband just died. So he ran off to New Orleans and is buried here in the city, but we lost his tomb.
Oh, was that one of the ones that Nicolas Cage purchased to build his pyramid, or?
No, but actually the Humbert plaque is right near Nicolas Cage's tomb, like very close by. The plaque that says John Humbert was buried here, somewhere around here.
When I took a tour of that cemetery, the guy didn't show us that plaque.
Usually people don't. I've shown a few people here and there. I actually had somebody who showed up on the tour one time looking for that plaque. One of his descendants. I mentioned Humbert for an interesting reason, though. He took part in the Battle of New Orleans. He showed up when Andrew Jackson came to New Orleans to defend the city. He showed up in his old French officer's uniform and said, "Reporting for duty."
Huh.
And Jackson loved him. They got along really well. But at one point, Jackson sent him, during the Battle of New Orleans, he sent him to the West Bank because the British attacked on both sides of the river to give orders. The officer on the West Bank looked at him and said, "I don't take orders from you," because of his French uniform. What an idiot. Yeah, Humbert managed to fight in both wars prominently. Interesting guy. The only reason he's not on this list is because Humbert never commanded more than a brigade. But anyway, so interesting guy, and Leclerc is tied into that. Leclerc's kind of a mystery. It's a bit hard to rate him. He was a good staff officer, very brave. He was given that really tough assignment in Saint-Domingue, which was a disaster. You know? I find it very, very hard to rate Leclerc. I almost don't want to do it, really.
Okay. Well, we can hold off on that, maybe revisit Leclerc later on. In the meantime, we can talk about Mr. Joseph Soem.
Soem is one of the scummiest guys on this list.
Get a good close up here. He looks a little like Tywin Lannister.
Yeah, he does. He was kind of a political conservative. I mean, he had served in the Royalist Army. He was involved in some intrigues. Probably his two best moments was winning the Battle of Tourcoing and also resisting, I want to say, the Siege of Dunkirk, I want to say, during the French Revolution. So not a bad commander, really. But he was sent to Spain, did well under Massena, who liked him a lot. And he actually beats Wellington. He's the guy who orchestrates the defeat of Wellington at Burgos. Wellington was besieging the fortress. Several French forces prevented him from carrying this out, but the main one was Soem. So he did very well there, and that essentially got him a corps command in Germany. He did, off and on. He was one of the guys who helped betray Napoleon in 1814. And when the Bourbons were restored, he became a hardcore Bourbon supporter. He seems to have been a pretty good, if not brilliant, commander, if not exactly one you can trust. I'd probably go the C.
All right. So for the people who went Bourbon, could we say that they were purple-pilled?
Yes, you can say they were purple-pilled.
All right. We'll just go with that as a sort of shorthand, I guess. At least if they were like legitimate Bourbon royalist rather than just opportunist.
Once you go Bourbon, you never go back, right?
Yeah, once you go Bourbon, you never go back. You never do whiskey again.
Never go to Napoleon's side ever again, man. You're done.
Yeah. Unless you're Ney.
Yes.
All right, so we got...
There's much ones. I think Mortier also went Bourbon and then went back,
Next up, we have somebody with a very fascinating career. I did read about him a little bit. Carl Philippe von Wrede.
Oh, that's the Bavarian guy, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, God. He is so full of shit. What do you think about him?
Well, I never knew that... I guess it makes sense that some of the countries that contributed troops to Napoleon, especially some of the larger German states like Bavaria, would contribute generals as well. But it's interesting because I think of, with the exception of, was the guy who served as an advisor, Moreau, I don't think anybody else in this list both fought for and against Napoleon. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he fought against him early on. He was at Hohenlinden fighting against Moreau, actually. Yeah.
So he was anti-French, a French stooge, and then anti-French again. That's quite an arc.
Quite an arc. My two favorite stories about him was, of course, he suffered a very minor wound at Wagram, and then he looked at MacDonald and he said, I am wounded. Tell Napoleon to take care of my family and that I die for him. And then MacDonald said, I think you can tell him that yourself.
Oh, my God. So it was just like some obvious flesh wound that wasn't...
Oh, yeah. And Verd apparently was openly angling to get a marshal's baton. I think Napoleon said, I can make him a general division, but never a marshal.
Wow.
He, of course, betrayed Napoleon right before Leipzig. He famously tried to block Napoleon's retreat at Hanau, which is a fierce little battle that was fought after Leipzig. The Bavarian army is essentially just swept aside. In some regard, you could say that, hey, he's trying to block Napoleon's retreat, so it's worth the effort. But I always kind of got the impression that he fought the battle more to try to show the coalition, like, hey, look, I'm serious. I'm really with you guys now, you know?
Right.
That's just my opinion on him, as far as that one goes. Let me check some other notes on him. Oh, yeah. He apparently advised Wellington on Napoleon before Waterloo. You know about this?
No.
Yeah, like before he was at the Congress of Vienna, and then he gave Wellington some advice before he departed to fight Napoleon. Advice has been described as helpful, but I don't actually know the details in the advice. I think we have his word for it, and as you can see, he's a self-promoter. I mean, I don't know, man. Hanau, his dispositions were bad. His army was smashed to pieces. He didn't really do very well in anything in particular except some army reforms in Bavaria. I'd probably go with an E.
All right. Yeah, he seems kind of crap. I mean, it's hard to like a guy who was such a melodramatic little bitch about a flesh wound when you got so many marshals in the army. Like Oudinot suffered 36 wounds or 28 or how many it was.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I had a friend once who got drunk and cut his arm, and he ran up to us after he had left the bar, and his forearm was covered in blood, and he showed me the wound, and he was like, dude, I think I'm going to bleed out. I looked at him like, dude, that's a flesh wound, because it was obviously a flesh wound.
Yeah.
And he's like, what, are you a doctor? How do you know? I'm like, well, you're not gushing blood in a way that is in rhythm with your heartbeat, so no vein or artery has been severed. This is just common anatomy. You'll be okay.
Yeah.
You just got to go to the hospital.
You know, this is actually not Sherman's fault. I want to mention this one because when I first read about Shiloh, they'd be like, Sherman did really well, which he did once the fighting started. And they'd be like, he suffered, he was wounded twice. I was like, that's impressive. He got some buckshot in his hand, and spent ball, like, hit his saber and caused a bruise. You know?
Okay.
Now, technically, Sherman was wounded. He got buckshot in the hand. He had to bandage it up. But it wasn't the kind of wound that takes you out of commission, you know?
Right. Still pretty painful, though. Any kind of hand wound can be an inconvenience for sure.
Oh, I know. I'm not trying to downplay him getting shot. I just mean that when they would say, like, he got wounded twice, they made it sound like he's bleeding and he's still with the men, you know? That's what
I mean, I would say he got wounded once and had a close call, but...
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying, like, I would just cavalierly shrug off this wound, but it's not something I would, write about later and then talk about how brave I was to persevere when there are people getting their heads blown off by cannonballs.
Funny you mentioned that. A member of Grant's staff, who Grant was talking to, had his head taken right off at Shiloh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Ferocious battle. Most battles are, but, that's one's particularly ferocious. But anyway, back to the Napoleonic Wars. Who's our next loser?
Next up, we have Charles Morand, or Morand.
Oh, Morand?
Yeah.
Oh, do you know much about Morand?
Not especially, no.
Well, Morand's an extreme, very heroic officer, attached to Bernadotte, one of his friends, commanded a brigade in Egypt. He led a division under Soule at Austerlitz, and then Davout at Osterdat, then with Lannes. So he's considered one of your finest division commanders of the wars. And he'll lead the middle guard at Waterloo. Don't know much about his personality, but I know in terms of division commanders, he had an almost impeccable reputation. Got to go with a B.
Okay. So basically, he was a pretty good officer, brave, boring.
Yeah.
Not really a lot of great stories there.
No, but I will say his picture. He looks like the wind's blowing his hair all the way back. Like he almost looks like the Wolfman meets Michael J. Fox or something.
Right.
He's got one of the weirder faces of this list.
I may have messed up with the guy you didn't want to rank. I may have put him in somebody's place.
Okay, who would that be?
I probably placed Leclerc somewhere on the chart. I didn't mean to. Oh, but you said the guy with the hair is Morand.
Yeah, the hair is like all the way back. It looks like
All
he
right.
looks like he just blow. He looks like an '80s blow dry experiment
Yes,
gone.
he looks like the antagonist from Billy Madison.
There you go.
What's about so what did Leclerc look like again? He had the he was in the uniform, tall, gold sash.
He's got a sash, a hat, and he's pointing. You know, it's
Okay,
very
yeah, I'll move
classical
him back
military
to the pool
look,
here.
You know.
All right, now we're back on track.
Okay.
All right. So next up is, and here's a hell of a name, Louis Vincent Joseph. One word, all hyphenated. Leblanc de Saint-Hilaire.
Saint-Hilaire is another one of these excellent division commanders. Led one at Austerlitz and Jena. At Austerlitz, he gained the Pratzen Heights, arguably the moment where the coalition's going to lose the battle. Superb tactician, brave and reckless. He died at Aspern-Isling, and this is a point where Napoleon's going to be making this guy a corps commander at any moment. Napoleon actually wanted to have a pantheon of heroes where Saint-Hilaire would be one of the featured people buried there, you know?
Huh.
Yeah, the only guy who gives him a run for his money as a division commander is Friant. I think I'm going to go with an A with Saint-Hilaire, though, because everybody was pretty sure once he reached corps command, he was going to do just fine.
Damn. Well, I guess did Napoleon ever do sort of a reflection on whose death he regretted the most? Was Saint-Hilaire mentioned in that context at all, or?
I don't know. I haven't read all of those recollections. I know that he felt bad about the way he treated Davout after Russia. I know, like, his memoirs, he had high praise for guys like Davout and Laurie. So, no, it's kind of hard to tell, really, that one. Definitely at the moment it happened, though, when Napoleon hears that Saint-Hilaire is dead, he is physically affected by it. And keep in mind, this is Aspern-Isling, so he also loses land. So in his mind, he loses, in many ways, his best friend and easily one of his four best corps commanders. And he just lost what he thinks is his best division commander. So Aspern-Isling is a particularly bitter pill for Napoleon.
Yeah, sounds like it.
I mean, it's his first tactical defeat since Syrian campaign, and it costs him two of his best.
Wasn't he trying to sort of replicate the Battle of the Hydaspes in a way in that battle, or?
Ooh, I don't know about that. I don't know a reference to that, but he would have thought about something like that for sure. I mean, as you know, he was obsessed with Alexander the Great.
Yeah, because I think you were telling me about the battle plan for that one time, and I remember saying, well, that's basically the Hydaspes.
Which is what? Force your way across a river?
Well, you have one force demonstrating and keeping the enemy occupied, while you have another force seeking a ford and attacking from the rear. Then when they attack, the main force crosses the river and attacks in front.
I got to look up my notes on Aspern-Isling. It's been a while. I haven't read a book on it in like 10 years, It kind of sounds like it. Although it could be like the Granicus, really,
Well, the Granicus was just a simple crossing in the face of the enemy while you try to draw the enemy into the river and get them to commit while you're crossing. So they lose the advantage of the bank.
Yeah, not exactly Granicus then. Okay, just making sure. But yeah, no, I mean, something like that would have been on Napoleon's mind. Alexander was one of the ones he listed as one of the greatest generals ever,
Well, I guess, to be fair, Archduke Charles probably also read about those battles, so he...
Oh, yeah, Charles Intelligent, well-read man. Yeah, but God, Napoleon, who were his favorites? Alexander the Great, Frederick the Great, Renee, the great French Marshal, Julius Caesar, Hannibal. He wasn't as impressed by Marlborough. He was more impressed by Eugene. But, I think that also has to do with Napoleon's Anglophobia too.
Right.
Who's our next guy?
Next up,
Exelmans?
we have Remy Exelmans, yeah.
Remy Exelmans. Minor staff officer, but he was one of Marat's guys. So he gets to move up the ranks. Very brave, of course. By the time he gets to Russia, he's commanding a cavalry corps where he didn't do as well, but he's a staunch Bonapartist, right? So Exelmans is interesting because he's one of the reasons the 100 Days happens. He defied the Bourbons and insulted them, so he's put on trial. And that trial, along some other things, the fact that Exelmans was defying the Bourbons was one of the things that emboldened Napoleon to land. Led a cavalry command at the Waterloo campaign, won the last French victory of the Napoleonic Wars at Rocquencourt, where he destroyed some pursuing Prussian cavalry. Openly condemned Ney's execution and was so afraid that he'd be executed that he fled. Eventually returned. Actually, he became a marshal.
Oh, wow.
And comically enough, died after falling from his horse. Comical for a cavalryman, you know? Exelmans was pretty good. I wouldn't call him a great one, though. He's pretty good. I don't know, kind of... Yeah, I'd give him a C. He's a solid commander. I think the most interesting thing is his defying the Bourbons, you know, playing a part in Napoleon's return.
Makes sense. So I guess after that point, at least for the 100 Days, he might have been one of Napoleon's favorites.
Definitely. Hence, he already had corps experience, so he's kind of a shoo-in to command another corps.
Next up, we have Jean-Joseph de Hautpoul, or de Hautpoul, or something like that.
Yeah, de Hautpoul. You know anything about him?
I have never heard of this man.
He was a noble, straight-up noble, but he had been promoted only very slowly. And some of that to do with, like, in this age of, you know, the Enlightenment age, where it's known for a bit of frivolity and loosing of sexual mores amongst the nobility in general. He was known for having a rough manner, stern morality, and he actually liked the men he led, the commoners. He got along with them. This probably saved him, by the way. When the French Revolution happens, he was supposed to be executed. His men mutinied and said, "You execute him, we're out of here." They back down. His men save him.
Huh.
Yeah. Bravery and skill was absolutely legendary. Now, he wasn't the kind of guy you want to hang out with necessarily. Remember, he's kind of stern and everything, but, I mean, he's beloved by the men under him for that bravery and whatnot. One of the favorites of Ney and Marat. Charges broke some of the infantry squares at Austerlitz. Napoleon was really starting to like him. He actually hugged him after one of the battles, you know, which was apparently made him blush because he was very reserved. Anyway, here's how he died. He was wounded at Eylau, and he refused amputation from Laurie. His refusal is one of the reasons why amputation became more popular in the army, because they found out he had turned it down and died. Not much to find bad about him. He never really commanded a cavalry corps, but he probably would have if he had gone on. I'd probably got to go with a B with him at least, you know?
Okay. Sounds like he also had a lot of legitimacy with the troops.
He did, although he wasn't popular with fellow officers. That's the way to look at it, because of that stern manner. He wasn't the kind of guy you're going to have a beer with or something. Right? But the men liked him a lot. And they saved him. They saved him from the guillotine.
All right. Next up is Marie-Victor Malberg.
Marie-Victor Malberg, tied to Lafayette, the Marquis, the one who went to America. He fled France during the Terror, so he backed it at first, but of course he fled during the Terror. Served in Egypt, and then started working his way through the cavalry. One of the reasons Napoleon kept him around was a way to keep kind of Lafayette faction in France, if you will, happy. And Lafayette faction, by the way, could probably be described as like liberal constitutional monarchy, essentially. Yeah, he was very, very courageous. Did very well in Russia, actually. He played a prominent role in the retreat and at Leipzig. Nonetheless, keeping in mind that has monarch sympathies, he sided with the Bourbons during the 100 Days, which is actually a break from Lafayette, because Lafayette backed Napoleon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Marburg was good. I give him a B. He's one of the better cavalry commanders and one of the best, and he could handle a corps pretty well too. I don't think he was necessarily like a genius. Maybe he was. I don't know. I almost want to give him an A.
So with Lafayette backing Napoleon, did Napoleon ever consider giving Lafayette a command of any kind?
No. Lafayette was not considered for any kind of military. Napoleon did make many efforts, though, to win him over. Never quite did. When I say Lafayette backed him in the 100 Days, it was always conditional. Like, the moment you start acting like an autocrat, I'm out of here,
Ah.
Lafayette's backing, though, probably helped Napoleon a bit because, he brings that faction in, except for Marburg. Has to stay with the Bourbons, which rewarded him. He had some major commands post Waterloo in France. To actually bump up Marburg to an A. He really was an outstanding cavalry corps commander.
All right. So after him comes Edouard Milhaud or something like that.
Yeah, another friend of Marat, and one of his favorites who was risen up the ranks, convinced Jacobin. He led some cavalry through Austerlitz, Jena, and Eylau. Served in Spain, but his health was wrecked there. At Ligny, he led the charge that actually broke the Prussian center. Fun fact, at Waterloo, he was the one trying to convince Ney not to launch the charge that broke the cavalry. That slaughter failed.
Right.
But yeah, fun fact, when he left post Waterloo, a lot of these guys returned a few years later. He didn't return until 1830. I gotta give him a B. He was he wasn't like one of those flashy cavalry commanders, but he was a very smart one. One who was not going to commit a stupid mistake.
That's always useful, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And he did well. I can't think of many battles where this guy did poorly. This really does show you the depth officers in Napoleon's cavalry. And Marat, for whatever his failings were, it must be said, Marat had a very good eye for talent for cav officers.
Yeah. So far, it does seem like most people associated with them were pretty competent.
Yeah, not too many knuckleheads, right?
Next up is Louis Montbrun.
Montbrun, another Marat favorite as well. Particularly known for his abilities at reconnaissance. Remember, reconnaissance was one of the weaker points with Marat, but Montbrun was one of the guys who could make up for that weakness. Napoleon was a bit annoyed with him, though. Sometimes. Probably his most famous action was in 1809 when he led the cavalry in the charge at Sommelserre, which is one of the most successful and dynamic charges of the war. They overwhelm a Spanish position and break through the mountains. He died leading a cavalry charge at Borodino, and apparently when this news came back to Napoleon and his staff, they openly wept. He was just great at leading a charge. Fun fact about him, though, he had a very easygoing manner when he wasn't in a battle. Like in a battle, his blood would be up, right? But when he was in camp, easygoing. Montbrun's a B, I'd say.
Okay. Sounds good. And for anybody wondering, in case the moaning and whining is picking up on my end, I have a 14-year-old wiener dog with dementia, and he's also very nocturnal. So that is what that sound is, in case it's picking up.
I will say, on my end, I hear nothing.
Okay, that's good. I know my old mic was more sensitive to background noise. This one doesn't seem to be as much, but I know with that old one, if the bathroom fan downstairs was running, you could hear it very audibly.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this one seems to work a lot better for that, which is good because the Doge is loud when he starts whining, and he just wanders in the corners and can't figure out how to get out sometimes. So just stand there and whine at the wall. Okay.
Who's our next? Nansudi?
Yes, Etienne Nansudi.
Yeah, he's one of the oddballs of the cavalry. He wasn't super eager about the revolution. Definitely a conservative, but he stuck by with France. And the men respected him, but here's a fun thing. He made sure that his men had to keep their hair in the old regime style, like powdered and everything. And when the men cut their hair, he almost had the officers arrested.
Wow.
Oh yeah, that's one of the twos. Nansudi has one of my favorite little stories. At Wagram, Napoleon tried to give him, try to direct the cavalry in such a way, like giving them orders or something. And Nansudi said to him, "After all, there is nothing your majesty can teach me about the handling of cavalry." So he was known for being a very independent-minded man. Competent cavalry commander, but not really that showy. Should be noted that he died or Napoleon escaped from Elba. So never had to make that choice, but I have very little doubts he would have backed the Bourbons. In fact, he was one of the more enthusiastic Bourbon backers in 1814. I think it's pretty easy to rate him a C. He was good, but he wasn't spectacular.
What did Napoleon say when he told him that he couldn't teach him anything about cavalry tactics?
Apparently Napoleon didn't say much because, for one thing, cavalry was something Napoleon didn't know very well. And it was said I think it was one of those things where the person says it with such confidence, you're just like, oh, yeah, you're right. Because I believe Napoleon was trying to give him more particular instructions or rebuking him or something. He just shot back with that.
That's interesting.
The next one's one of the ones I don't know a ton about him, but I've always liked what I've read about him.
Claude Pierre Pujol.
Yeah, one of the consummate light cavalry commanders, along with LaSalle and some other guys. So he rose up. He first did staff. He rose up the cavalry ranks. 1812 was given a corps in Germany. He essentially will command a cavalry corps from the Russian campaign all the way to Waterloo. There's very few. I've never really read about him doing poorly in any of these things. Particular distinction, though, at Dresden and at Waterloo. Good manners, very charismatic. And actually, that's one of the reasons the Bourbons did not persecute him, why he didn't run away at all, is that after Waterloo, he was actually able to win over the Bourbons. So he's this kind of guy who it seems like everybody just liked him. And he was pretty good at his job, too. I'd probably give him a B.
Okay. Had a lot of B's so far.
Yeah.
All right. And last, but not necessarily least, is Horace Sebastiani.
Yeah. I know we have a lot of B's. I do want to mention this. The Napoleon's marshals were given more responsibilities, so that's why these guys are higher ranked in many ways. We're talking about men who often commanded divisions and occasionally corps. In a few cases, they were men who should have been a marshal. Like Damme, for instance, was always annoyed that he wasn't a marshal. And apparently the reason was because Napoleon's like, you're just too much of a jerk,
Yeah.
Or somebody Junot who wanted to be a marshal, and then when he was given that chance, he fumbled the ball. So should be noted we're talking about a number of guys who had lesser responsibilities than the marshals, hence slightly higher rankings, but I don't mind doing that. That's why we didn't rate these guys with the likes of Ney and Soule, Davout, and the rest,
Right, because comparing apples and oranges in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few of these guys I would have put on that list, like Junot or Van Damme and Jerome Bonaparte, because they had responsibilities that were on the level of a marshal. But in the end, I think it's good we separate the list. And I think the B's really show you that Napoleon had a deep bench of.
No, he did.
So yes, Sebastiani is the only Corsican on this list. related to the Bonapartes and one of their political supporters. So he wasn't close friends with Napoleon, but he was close friends with Lucien. So he was pretty much guaranteed to have pretty high posts. Now, he did a lot of diplomatic work as well, particularly in the Turkish Empire. And he led troops in a variety of campaigns from 1809 to 1814, mostly cavalry. That being said, he was considered a mediocre cavalry commander, lazy, and a notorious plunderer. He did seem to get a little better as things went on, but he started off pretty poor, and he really owed his position to his political ties to the Bonaparte. Yeah, he did not rally to, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think he rallied to Napoleon during the 100 Days. I know he became allied to the liberal faction in France, and so he actually was friends with Foy, our stockbroker.
Yeah.
And Benjamin Constant. You ever heard of him?
Famous English politician of the period, right?
No, Benjamin Constant is a French liberal thinker.
Oh.
Yeah, so, yeah, no. He's a French liberal thinker. Benjamin Constant created the Constitution he created the Constitution that Napoleon had, that Napoleon created when he took over. Okay? It looks like no. I just decided to check Wikipedia real quick on that one about the National Guard, about the 100 Days. And he did back Napoleon, but seems like he wasn't a super enthusiastic backer. It should be noted this guy was known for being a political turncoat, right? So he switched sides all the time. But anyway, Benjamin Constant, who he was friends with, a French liberal thinker, he created the Constitution that Napoleon accepted in 1815, which many people said was a very good constitution. What they didn't like about it was that Napoleon didn't really put it up for a vote. He just said, here's your constitution. Even though people looked at it and said, this is pretty good and it was well liked, people were like, we don't like the way you did this. It's autocratic. You can kind of see that when that happens, Napoleon's support in France starts to waver at that point, outside the hardcore base. But no, Benjamin Constant, Popkin, who we talked about earlier, was a fan of Benjamin. Benjamin Constant is one of the people. When people discuss differences between Britain and France and the way they've approached things, like say they're philosophically or with capitalism, Benjamin Constant is kind of noted as somebody who probably would have been more at home in Britain. You look at his name, right? You thought he was British, right?
Yeah, I mean, based on the name, and I know he's mentioned as a political philosopher or politician of some kind, so I just assumed he was British just by the name.
He's actually Swiss, to be clear, but you get my drift. Yeah, no, important thinker and whatnot. So Sebastiani, intelligent man, not a particularly great cavalry commander. He did show some improvement, though, so I'll give him a C. He was improving towards the later half of the wars.
So I remember reading about him in Spain. Apparently, there was one battle, I believe it was Vittoria, or one of the major battles where the French lost a lot of officers. And I think he was under Marmot. Marmot got wounded, the second in command got wounded, and then Sebastiani had to take command for a short period of time.
Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like Sebastiani did not back Napoleon during the 100 Days. Sorry. I got that a little confused. My bad. He did not back him during. But anyway, you were saying, man?
Yeah, so apparently Sebastiani had he was about the third in command of one of the armies in Spain. I believe it was Marmot's army. And there were so many officer casualties in one of the battles that he was temporarily placed in command because Marmot and then the second in command both got wounded.
That sounds like Salamanca.
It might have been Salamanca. It was one of the ones where Wellington won pretty handily, and the French officer casualties were pretty horrendous.
Yeah, that's I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure that's Salamanca.
Yeah, it's either Vittoria or Salamanca or one of the particularly bad defeats. Maybe Vittoria, one of those.
AB, man, AB. But you know a little bit more about the Peninsular War than I know. But yeah, nothing tells me that he was a particularly great commander. He was pretty involved in politics post-war, though. Once again, known for being a turncoat. Yeah, I gotta go. I'll go with a. What rating did I give him? C or D? C. Yeah, I'll stick with a. Now I'll give him a D. Screw it.
Okay.
He was proving he was pretty rough at first.
So that leaves us with one person who we didn't previously rank, and that is Charles Leclerc.
Tough one, man. I don't want to rate him. I think it's important to talk about him, but I mean, I don't know. He did pretty poorly in Saint-Domingue, but it was a pretty shit assignment. E, maybe? I mean, people considered him very talented, though. Like, and he would have been one of the Marshals for certain.
Well,
or maybe not for certain, but if I'm pretty sure he would have made the Marshal. He might have been the lower end of that, the lower rank. I think he would have made it.
All right. Well, we just created a list. I'm gonna save it here on tierlist.com as the Sean Chick ranking of these guys.
Excellent, man. You got any last comments about any of these men, or any questions about them, or something like that?
Not really. I can't think of too much. Don't really have any last words or smart remarks or whatever. Just that I guess we're planning on coming back in the future with more content. I guess the next thing we do will probably be American Revolutionary Generals.
Yeah. I was talking about doing that one. They're pretty fascinating. I know quite a bit about them. Both American and British. The British ones are a bit under discussed sometimes, but you got some fascinating guys there. So I think that one will be interesting. We can bring it back to the U.S. of A. too. I know some people wanted us to maybe discuss some of Napoleon's opponents. I mean, that would be a pretty massive list.
Right.
It's doable. He just fought so many damn battles.
Yes, I guess for that one we'd need to divide it into multiple parts based on region.
Or you know what you could do with that one, honestly? We could do just like the top 20, the big one.
Like
I could put
Archduke Charles and the Blucher and those kind of guys.
Archduke Charles, Blucher, Wellington, Wormser, guy I mentioned earlier. Mac, yeah, we mentioned Mac. Mac Attack, right?
Yeah. No, I remember every time we'd play that one Napoleonic War game, I'd always send Mac off on an assignment and hope I'd get lucky.
I remember that one time Danny had Mac and he won like 4 battles in a row. At one point, one of you just avoided Mac because you're like, you know what? I'm not going to take my chances.
Yeah, no, sometimes in those games, especially dice-based games, you can get somebody who totally sucks and just kick ass with them. I remember one time we played a Hannibal game and Varro was tearing ass.
Yeah. I'll say one thing about Mac. Mac is another head injury guy because he was pretty well thought of, and then he suffered a head injury. Never the same. Started showing erratic behavior, so he's in the Junot Club.
Yeah.
I think we should do a Napoleon's opponents list. It won't be comprehensive, but it'll hit the highlights. Not even this list is comprehensive. There's a variety of corps commanders we probably didn't even go into in this one. I just chose the ones who commanded a corps in multiple battles or were very prominent division commanders because I wanted to get their names out there, like Friant and Saint-Hilaire. And just figured this was a pretty good one to go with in that regard.
Yeah, and I guess to be fair, the French army of this period is pretty fucking big, so they had a lot of generals.
Very big.
There's no way we're going to cover all of them.
Very big, very proficient. In the era of horse and musket, this is the best army of the era. Is French Revolutionary to Napoleonic War, which makes what the British do all the more impressive. But I can't call the British army of this era better because the British had some very good infantry tactics. Their cavalry was good, but not as good as the French. Their artillery had major weaknesses. And while their officer corps was very erratic, as any of these would be. I mean, even this, every officer corps is going to have weaknesses, but the British one has some glaring weaknesses. And I think the British were lucky in that they had a good tactical scheme, accidentally, of course, but also that they had Wellington. But this is the best horse and musket army of the era. Your only real competition is the Russians, say. Oh, and Charles XII Swedes. They were really good, too.
Yeah, although, I mean, that was a much shorter-lived army, from what I understand, right? I mean, that was almost a flash in the pan, in a way.
Sort of, but Sweden had already for generations had a tradition of a very good military. Kind of ends with Charles XII, really. But
yeah, they traded that in for peace and happiness. What a bunch of idiots.
I know, man, I know. But I mentioned an interesting thing about Charles XII, though, because I'll have Swedes on my tours, and I'll mention, I know Charles XII, and sometimes they give me odd looks, and I found out why. Charles XII is popular with the far right in Sweden.
Oh.
Which, you can take a historical figure and make him what you want, right? I mean, Thomas More is in Red Square. Okay?
Yeah,
do you
that's
think Thomas,
weird.
Because of Utopia.
Oh.
Right? I guess if you want to emphasize just this one book he wrote, but I don't think Thomas More is really going to be into militant atheists, right? The guy got executed for being a Catholic.
Yeah.
So, it's very, you can take somebody and make them into what you want or emphasize the parts that you like and forget the rest, of course. Sorry. No, so the, wait, what was I talking about earlier? We were talking about Thomas More. What was the other thing? Yeah, we're Thomas More. Oh, Charles XII.
Yeah, Charles XII, yeah.
I don't know how Charles XII would feel about the far right of Sweden. I can't say, man. Charles XII is kind of a nutter, born for war, if you will, relished it. There's pretty good evidence he was probably asexual. He seems to have shown no interest in anybody. Truly a pure fighter. Fun fact, apparently killed with a magic bullet.
Huh.
How about that?
No.
Yeah, he was a siege in Norway, and he was shot with a bullet, and the bullet had apparently a button of his. The idea being that you have to take an item off of him to use the magic to hurt him. That's a principle in magic. People who believe in magic will say the only way to do a spell on somebody or to break a curse or make a curse or whatever it is to have an item of theirs. Maybe their sunglasses, or in this case, his button. Button was in the bullet when it shot him. People believed he was magical.
So basically, some con man made a lot of money that day.
Maybe, maybe not. It should be said, though, man, like, Charles XII was really good, and like he won battles where he would attack and he was outnumbered like 4 or 5 to 1. He'd still win because his army was that good, that committed, and actually there was a religious aspect to it. The Swedish army believed that God was with them. And Charles XII, he wasn't at Poltava, actually. He ordered the attacks, but he wasn't the commander because he was ill. They think that's one of the reasons why the Swedish army didn't do as well, because the soldiers felt our representative of God is not here, Fun thing, when Charles XII returned to Sweden after his exile in Turkey, he had a coin minted that said, like, "Why do you despair? God and I exist."
What?
Yeah, fascinating guy, man. One of those characters in history when you read about him and you're like, okay, this is crazier than most fiction I've read.
Yeah, that's some balls of steel right there, minting that coin.
Yeah, definitely. Charles XII has balls of steel, no doubt about it.
He's the Duke Nukem of his age.
Yeah. But one last thing I'll mention, Napoleon was very critical of Charles XII, and Napoleon, if you really wanted to piss him off, compare him to Charles XII because they had both invaded Russia and failed, right?
Right.
In fact, when Napoleon asked a Russian officer who was captured, what's the best road to Moscow, he said through Poltava. Which Napoleon was like, fuck you, you're insulting me kind of thing. Right? But anyway, Napoleon would write this whole thing about how my invasion of Russia made way more sense than Charles's. My logistics was better and everything. some of it was like obviously an older man realizing he had fucked up terribly and trying to make up for it. But Napoleon was overall pretty critical of Charles XII. Considered him a very good tactician, but that was about it, which probably has a lot of truth to it. But that being said, Charles XII is definitely, at least in the battlefield, one of the finest commanders of the era. The Swedish army he commands is one of the most impressive for me. So there's my long digression on the Swedes of Charles XII.
They still weren't quite as good as the Swedes of Bernadotte.
No, the Swedes of Bernadotte didn't do much. I believe Bernadotte kind of had orders where, like, look, we want the Swedish army there, help them out, but don't help too much. Like, you can fight a battle, but don't fight too big of a battle. I think that was kind of the orders he was given. Sweden couldn't afford heavy losses. That said, for the next list, I wanted to ask you, did you want to do the American Revolution stuff, or did you want to do Napoleon's opponents?
I don't know. Good question. I guess maybe we could talk about it and then just make it a surprise for next week, or whenever we get back to do another one.
That sounds good to me, man. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, sometimes I just like to keep people on their toes, drop a bomb here or there.
Yeah, like comparing Justinian the First to Justinian the Second.
Yeah, you gotta mix things up.
Yeah, it was a pretty good video, man. I liked all the discussions about Justinian the Second. I like Justinian the Second. I mean, I don't like him, but I also kind of like him.
Yeah, he's a complex figure. Man, yeah, he's got one of the more tumultuous reigns probably I've ever read about, and I really wish we'd had a more detailed contemporary source for him, because I feel like no matter what that source said, it would be fascinating.
Yeah, no kidding, man. But isn't that during the Byzantine Dark Age or something?
Basically, yeah. I mean, pretty much any time after Heraclius' reign, we're more or less in a Dark Age, especially getting toward Justinian's era. And basically, Byzantium has a prolonged legitimacy crisis because the leadership is failing over and over and over on multiple fronts. But yeah, Justinian II, I feel like he had all the qualities you would need to be a successful ruler. He just needed a little more experience and slightly better circumstances.
Yeah. I think before we go, though, now that we've kind of finished this up, we've discussed Napoleonic commanders. And, oh, by the way, I know we might do a Civil War thing discussing some important battles for people. But one question I had for you is, on this list, since we talked about a lot of guys who are not as famous, did anybody really stand out to you as impressive in your opinion?
Louis de Say, I didn't realize that he played such a big role at Marengo, because I know Marengo was a very close run affair, so it sounds like he may have been the guy who saved the day. Van Damme, I mean, I didn't know as much about him. I just knew that, the lines about him.
Yeah.
Friant, Saint-Hilaire, Foy, Dupont, a couple of those guys were more impressive than I expected. Dumas had a little more experience under his belt than what I thought. And also, of course, Larry. Larry I had no idea who that was, but obviously he's very important.
Yeah.
So for me, he was sort of the big revelation.
Gotcha, man. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and close things up on this one. We'll see about American Revolution or Napoleon's opponents.
Or maybe something completely different. You never know. Maybe we'll talk about space missions by the Soviet Union and rank those.
We still got to do Soviet premieres sometime, right?
Yeah, we do. I still need to talk to my friend Jean Drew about that, because he is an expert in Stalin stuff, so he'd be the guy to talk to.
And then you got me, who's like the guy who's like, look, if Andropov had lived, the Soviet Union would have went on longer.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, I might try to, if I can get Dries to come on, I might try to get Michael to come on too, because I know that they disagree on some stuff, so that might be fun.
Oh, Kramer?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be nice. That'd be good, man.
Yeah, that could be fun.
I'd like that.
Yeah, low-key, Dries thinks that Stalin is kind of cool. So...
Well, I'll leave your groups with this, man. I was just, right before I came over here, was watching Star Trek with my friend because they still play it on one of the TV stations here. Yeah. It's funny, like from 7 to about midnight, it's like Star Trek Next Generation, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Voyager. You get my drift, right?
Right. So it's a pretty cool station.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big Trekkie, but I like the original series. Probably my favorite of the ones. And Next Generation has like highs are high and the lows are low, is my opinion on TNG. But anyway,
DS9 is fucking great.
Everybody says that, man. I've seen a few episodes here and there, and I probably should take a look at.
Yeah, you should probably. I mean, it's one that takes a little while to get going, but once it gets going, I promise you, it blows away the other series.
All right, I like the goofiness of the original series, and I like the idea that they're making this shit up as they go.
Yeah, Mr. Spock, we must reach out to these other species and form an accord. We must find a way to make things work. That's what the Federation is about.
I don't think Kirk does that in the original series as much. That's what he does in the movies. Like in the movies, he has all those giant pauses, but I don't know. I feel like in the show, he's a little more natural.
At times, unless he's given a soliloquy, like when they have that one goofy-ass episode where they talk about the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, by the way, for some reason, which was preserved on some random planet. That one, he does the pauses. But I think he was looking back on his works, and maybe he's like, holy shit, I was killing it when I was doing those dramatic pauses. I just need to do that all the time.
Actually, I'm going to say this, man. And by the way, right, I'll explain why I'm mentioning Star Trek in a minute here. It wasn't just a nerd out. But I will say, of all the Star Trek Kirk performances in the movies I saw, I think he was actually good in the first movie.
He was all right. I actually think he was good in the second movie. I know people make fun of a couple of his lines, but overall, I think he was actually pretty good.
Well, the thing about the Khan line where he yells Khan and people make fun of it, I mean, I get why. It is the scene's like filmed very goofy, but in some ways it makes perfect sense. He knows that he's not stranded, but he's trying to convince Khan that he is. He's overacting to overact for Khan. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because he knows that he's going to get beamed back up to the Enterprise. Because after he yells at Khan, he's all like very confident they're going to be fine, you know?
Yeah. There's also, I actually think his acting in, I can't remember if it was Star Trek 5 or 6, but it's one where he's doing a diplomatic mission with the Klingons, and they were responsible for his son's death, and you can tell that he is very uncomfortable being there, and he's looking for an excuse to punch somebody in the face. But I think he portrays that really well.
That's 6, yeah. So I guess what we're trying to say is that like sometimes Shatner is a surprisingly good actor and sometimes he's a surprisingly bad actor.
Yeah, sometimes he's really good in terms of some of those movies, and other times he is the William Shatner of Tech War.
So why the hell am I mentioning Star Trek here? Okay.
I don't know. Why are you mentioning Star Trek?
Because the episode that was on tonight for original series was Space Seed, which is the Khan episode.
Right.
And there's a redheaded woman on there. She, I think her name's like McIntyre or something. It's like an Irish name. She sides with Khan. And Khan figures this out because she has these paintings in her room. And it's like paintings of Richard the Lionhearted, right? A Roman gladiator. Napoleon Bonaparte. And then she actually was painting a picture of Khan.
Wow. So
she's into like powerful men, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say here is maybe your boy is like the girl in Space Seed.
He is to a large extent. He has admitted that he does admire people and institutions which exercise a lot of centralized power. So,
that's a scary thing, man. That is.
I know. I know. It's kind of weird because every time we're out drinking with him, it always comes up.
That's really weird. I will say this though, man. Like I always find that there's going to be some like people in history who are they're jerks, they're bad, and I like them. Which actually is something they mentioned in Space Seed. At one point, Scotty and McCoy are actually praising Khan a bit, and then Spock's like, "This is illogical. The man was a dictator," and then Kirk says, "Look, we can admire the man and be opposed to him," which is a very romantic concept. The political thinker Isaiah Berlin talked about that in his book on Romanticism. And he thought the important thing about Romanticism was that it created the idea of one of the important things is it created the idea that you could admire someone from the opposing side, which he said is very rare historically. Humans actually usually denigrate people from the opposing side.
Like when the Romans tried to make Hannibal the boogeyman for children.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, Hannibal was so horrible. It's like, yeah, like you guys did great stuff too. You know, like, I mean...
Yeah, and the Romans totally didn't start that war.
Yeah, the Romans also totally wouldn't go through a land and plunder it and enslave people, would they? So
no, they also wouldn't exploit their allies by making them, bear a good portion of the burden for war and then give them inferior rewards or anything like that either.
It should be noted there's probably a possibility that Hannibal's men might have been a little too reckless, and that might have turned away some potential allies. I don't want to get into that though, but the point is that they're talking about how you can admire the man and be opposed to him, and I think we've kind of lost that nowadays because we're very black and a lot of people, not everybody of course, but a lot of the people who are loudest online and in the media are very black and white in their thinking about figures. They can't understand that somebody can do good things and bad things.
Yeah, I've gotten at least a couple of comments. I don't know, it might be by the same person, I can't remember, but there's always somebody in almost every Napoleon video who says something to the effect of, Napoleon was Hitler, why can't you see it?
Yeah. I mean, he does good and bad stuff. I think, like, probably of all the dictatorial types, if you will, that I have a soft spot for, or ones that I find are interesting and compelling, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and Lenin, right?
Yeah.
While, like Joseph Stalin and Tamerlane terrify me.
Yeah.
Like those two really scare me.
Yeah, Stalin creeps me out, especially the stories about how he would shoot the ground and make you dance for him.
Yeah, stuff like that. Oh god, there's one like I gotta look into this one. There's one like he got drunk or something and he was like bastard. He's like, I'd like to shoot that guy, it's stuff like that, right? Meanwhile, Tamerlane's making skull pyramids, right?
Oh, one interesting side note on Stalin, I was talking to Tina about Stalin the other day, and we happened to Google image search him, and the young Stalin came up, and Tina happened to comment, damn, he was good looking when he was young. And
yeah,
apparently that's like a whole thing on the internet. Like all kinds of women believe that.
Oh yeah, young Stalin looks hot. So does Eugene V. Debs. Should be noted that at least like teenage, like pre-World War I Hitler was considered attractive by women. There's a few records of that. A lot of it had to do with the piercing blue eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the one constant with descriptions of Adolf Hitler across the board is these piercing blue eyes. I think one person said, God, what a disagreeable, disgusting little man, but Jesus, those eyes. So, he had full confidence in himself too, So apparently, like, at least like, before the 1920s, like Hitler was considered attractive as well. I don't know if well, then again, maybe he would be, man. I mean, Hitler's very hipster-esque, right? I mean, he's a failed artist. He's a vegetarian.
Yeah, I feel like Hitler would probably get a decent amount of women. He'd be one of those guys who gets women and then other guys hate him and don't respect him at all.
What is with? Oh, he's very confident,
Yeah.
He's got a haircut that a lot of hipsters have.
Yeah, no, you're right. He totally would be that guy. And he'd also talk about his values a lot, and he would talk about his vegetarianism.
Yes. Oh, but fuck! I leave you with this, man. Like one of Hitler's plans was to make Germans more vegetarian. He would comment on like sausage is a waste. You know what I mean? So one of his long-term post-World War II plans was to shift the German people over to a vegetarian diet. Now, I don't know if plans were drawn up for that, but he was talking about it. Much like I think there would have been an acceleration against Christianity if they had won the war.
Really?
Oh, I think that was kind of the next target. I mean, not from the Goering types, but like the Himmler types and whatnot.
Because I feel like the one guy who might try to sabotage the Let's Go Vegetarian movement would have been Goering, because I feel like he's the kind of guy who likes steak.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, that's why a lot of people didn't show up to Hitler's dinners because they were considered terrible, and Goering was apparently never at a dinner with Hitler. Come by the Reichstag or whatever, talk. Got to look over a map, but as soon as Hitler's pulling out the knife and fork, Goering's like, I gotta go somewhere, bro.
Yeah.
Because he's living the high life, man. He's drinking fine wine. He's collecting art and whatnot. There's a reason, like, of all the Nazis, in some ways, he was the most popular in some ways in Germany because he seemed like the most accessible, I guess you would say. And
apparently at Nuremberg, he made friends with a couple of the GIs who were, keeping his cell, and he would try to offer them objects like, "Here's my watch. You should take it. I really like you. I think we've made a connection."
Oh yeah, like when they did the IQ tests, he scored the highest, and he was really trying to dominate all the other prisoners there, and to really get them to refuse. Because he said, "Look, the Allies have us on a show trial. They're just here to execute us. We need to show the German people that Nazism was right," kind of thing. And I think a lot of this to do with his reputation, because I don't think Goering was a true believer. I think he believed in the tenets of Nazism overall, but not the way a Goebbels or a Hitler. Like, those guys really believe, right?
Well, he certainly believed that supporting the Nazis would get him an endless stream of drugs, booze, and artwork, and he was right about that.
Yes. Oh, indeed. I think his appeal to Nazism appealed to him on the nationalist character. He was more of a realist about foreign policy. He was not one of the guys who was all like rah, let's go, let's go start a war in '39 kind of deal, right? Just from some of the stuff I've read, at least. But damn it, there's one thing I wanted to mention about those Nuremberg trials. Oh, that's right. Goering had the best defense of all of them in some ways. So for instance, like Karl Donitz, he definitely put up a defense that saved his skin, because Chester Nimitz wrote and said, yeah, our submarines attacked Japanese using tactics similar to the Germans. Because they were trying to say, like, you fought unrestricted submarine warfare, and then he said, so did you against Japan. That probably got... And also, it should be kept in mind that the U.S. military was, generally speaking, not enthusiastic about the prosecution of some of the high-ranking officers, especially in the charge of wars of aggression.
Yeah, because ironically, we've done a few of those since World War II.
That's kind of what they were saying. They're like, look, we've done those in the past. We're probably do in the future. Do you really want to make this illegal kind of a deal?
And then I'm sure somebody's like, no, we figured something out. What we could do is have a war and then not declare it. Therefore, it wouldn't count.
And I'm not going to get into the degree to which any of these Nazi criminals should have been hanged or not hanged or whatnot. I'm not going to get into it. I will say, though, that what scared the prosecutors about Goering was he was intelligent and he understood some of the hypocrisy involved. So he looks at the Soviets and he says, they're like, wars of aggression. And he's like, wait, you helped us invade Poland. You took over the Baltic states. You attacked Finland. And then it was revealed that the British were going to attack Norway before the Germans did. Or they were going to attack it and the Germans got there first.
Yeah. Although, by the same token, if someone as intelligent and cagey as Goering was backing the Nazis from the beginning, and whatever his motivations may have been, and he did help to guide the Luftwaffe.
Oh, yeah.
He either was a true believer or an opportunist, but at any rate, he was supremely guilty. He helped Hitler rise to power. Just like a lot... there were a few people they tried and executed where I didn't really understand it. Like, there was one general who had been forcibly retired in the mid-30s, and then he was put on trial. I'm like, what the hell did he do? He was retired the entire war. He had nothing to do with anything. His name was General Adam, something like that.
I'll have to look him up, actually. No, don't get me wrong. I'm talking about Goering's ability, intelligent enough to attack them in ways some of the other guys weren't. Like, you got a guy like Julius Streicher, who he was a moron, okay? He had to be dragged to the gallows yelling Heil Hitler, right? So no, I'm not talking about Goering being innocent or anything like that. I just mean that Goering could see like the hypocrisy of having like a bunch of Soviets be there,
Yeah.
He'd turn the knife on that one. And so there was a moment in the Nuremberg trials where they got afraid that Goering was going to outfox them. But in the end, like you're saying about Goering's guilt, I mean, yeah, he signs off on it. He's an opportunist. And when Hitler starts, collecting Jews, Goering doesn't say anything.
I mean, at least with someone like Donitz, I mean, he was appointed really late in the war too, right? I mean, I think he only took over the Navy the last year or something.
The last 2 years, but Donitz was like very pro-Nazi. Like he knew what was going on. His nickname in the Navy was Nazi Boy.
Oh God, because the Navy was less Nazi than the Army, right?
Oh yeah, the Navy had Jewish officers. One of which won like the Knight's Cross. He was in charge of one of the merchant raiders. But anyway, no, the Erich Raeder, the head of the German Navy, he was a conservative. What I found reading about him, because I find him very fascinating, because people don't talk about him. But of all the naval commanders in World War II, I mean, he literally commanded the German Navy from roughly like early 1920s to the very end. So all the navies that fought in World War II, his was definitely his navy. It was the thing that he had created. He chose the officers. And Raeder had no problem really with Nazis. He wasn't like a big fan of them necessarily. He's just a conservative. And in his opinion, he's like, as long as we don't have a democracy, I'm happy. He would have preferred a monarchy, that's for sure. But he's essentially that kind of conservative. Donitz, when he gets in charge of the Navy, he does promote a variety of more Nazi-fied officers. And the U-boat, under him in particular, even before that, the U-boats became increasingly more Nazi-fied. So one reason for that made some sense. If you get true believers on a U-boat, especially late in the war when the losses are high, they may go in there and fight hard, right? So it did make some sense. But yeah, Donitz was definitely like into the Nazi stuff for sure. He tried to downplay that, of course, after the war, which, that stuff always gets me. Those guys like, I wasn't much into Nazis. I'm like, yeah, we got the letters here, bro. Which, you got a guy like Ernst Riedel, who was the Stuka pilot, Ju-87, great dive bomber pilot. I'll say, to his credit, he never, after the war, ever said Nazism was bad. He stuck with it. You know why? Because he was a true believer and a psycho.
Yeah.
A guy like Donitz is like, oh, no, man, I wasn't really a Nazi. And it's like, yeah, whatever, man. The factions in the Navy called you Nazi boy for a reason,
Yeah, it's not because of your well-known hatred of that.
Yeah, I will leave you with this, man. Maybe we could do a Nuremberg list sometime, because I read several books on the trials. I think the psychology is fascinating, the sociological dynamic going on there. Rudolf Hess is infinitely fascinating. He is a bizarre character, Also, Himmler,
like that black magic shit he was into, is
fascinating
to say the least.
Yeah, I think if they're, in the post-Hitler power struggle that would have happened in a victorious Nazi Germany, I kind of see Himmler winning that fight. Because I feel like he was really with the ascendant forces within the Third Reich. And one of those was going to be anti-Christian.
So,
in the long.
Then I try to go back to like some Norse stuff, or what?
Something like that. I mean, keep in mind, Hitler is an atheist, right? So, Hitler used to say, if you understand humans, look at apes. He thought we were he really believed that that humanity's, which is bestial nature, was central. But that's also kind of fascinating, because we're also talking about a man who really admires, high art. Like the great painters. He's a fan of Wagner and Beethoven. So it's kind of a contradiction in his own thing. But, your average Nazi is an atheist or a pagan, really. Or Nazi leadership, that is. On the ground, lots of them are Christians. And I didn't expect to get into a side about Nazi war criminals.
Yeah, I didn't see that one coming either.
But no, I just make this clear, man. Yeah, Goering is as guilty as they come. I wasn't mentioning he was. I didn't mean he was like.
Oh no, I know what you mean. I just wanted to make sure in case somebody's like, "Oh my God, you guys aren't apologizing for Nazi war criminals." No, we're not. We're just saying that not everybody there was Goering.
Yeah. I'm also saying that Goering is more of an opportunist and a nationalist in the pure sense. You know what I mean? Like that's more of his deal than say like Himmler's obsessed with the paganism and all the racial stuff. Goebbels has a whole anti-capitalist bent, which is a whole other fascinating can of worms. But anyway, let's go ahead and leave the Nazis behind. Yeah. Napoleon's generals are so much better, aren't they?
I think so. I imagine. Because I'm not an expert on the Nazi generals, but based on what we've talked about the last couple weeks, I feel like maybe Napoleon had a better set of generals than Hitler, all things considered.
Oh, definitely. Like I was telling you, it's rare to run into any commander who had an assortment like this. I mean, Alexander the Great and Frederick the Great come to mind, as we already mentioned. Hitler did have very talented commanders. And, if you ever want to do a list of those, I mean, I've read books on them and whatnot.
I'm sure now that you mentioned that, there's going to be like 3 comments like, "Oh, God, please, I need that."
Yeah, we all need to talk about Nazi generals, right?
Yeah, we all need to make a 3-4 hour video of something that I probably won't be able to monetize.
Yeah, no kidding, man. Well, we've already said the N-word on this thing, N-word being Nazi, of course.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And I assume that gets us into this has already been demonetized because YouTube is too stupid to tell the difference between a documentary and propaganda by far-right forces.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you talk about them, you must be promoting them, even if you're saying that they were horrible.
Well, there is a belief that if you're a historian of something, you must like it. So when I was in Kentucky, I was considering being a historian of the Confederacy, looking at military politics and ideas, and it didn't mean I condoned the Confederacy. I just thought it was a fascinating topic.
Yeah, because I think there's that. You can find something fascinating in just a general sense. There are also a lot of people who either love or fucking hate whatever they study, because hatred can actually be a very big motivator to want to learn as much as possible about something.
Yeah. I will say this, of people who write about Nazis, the ones who hate them are sometimes off the least interesting analysis. The ones who like them offer like even worse analysis, like some real dumb stuff. But they also get into so many binds with themselves. But I think the books with the Nazis I've read that I find most interesting are ones who simply want to understand what this ideology is, who these people are, and how did this come to this.
Did I ever tell you about the time I read that biography of Franco? It was a short biography, just some series. They also had one on Patan and a couple other people.
Yeah.
Whoever this person was absolutely despised Franco. And because of that, I swear there are at least 12 or so times in the book where this person will talk about Franco being fat or paunchy or something like that. It just makes fun of his weight all over and over and over, as if that's the problem with Franco.
Wasn't the whole thing like, you don't like Rush Limbaugh or something? You're like, he's fat. It's like, okay, I get it. He's overweight, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are overweight, but most of them are not Rush Limbaugh.
Or, like conservatives will be like, this an ugly feminist. I'm like, okay, I don't care.
Yeah, it's their physical appearance has nothing to do with whether their ideas are good or not. Those are separable things.
Those are definitely separable things. So it's a dumb thing. I know what you're saying. I read a book in that series about Patan, and it was too positive on it. It was kind of trying to say that, Vichy France wasn't as bad as they say it was, and Patan wasn't as involved. And honestly, I don't want to get into that because I'm no Vichy France expert. I do think it's a fascinating thing that the French had this like weird fascist experiment that led to a lot of confusion during World War II.
Yeah.
I can comment that Patan was a brilliant military commander.
Yeah, I mean, he might be like a lot of career soldiers, somebody who got into politics later in life, after serving the first probably 70 or almost 70 years of his life as a soldier. military life, it has a very different dynamic than political life. And if you're accustomed to giving and taking orders, the give and take of politics is not going to come very easily.
Yeah.
And Pétain also seems to have had kind of a black and white worldview in a lot of ways, at least outside of military matters, where he was actually pretty forward-thinking about tank tactics, for instance. Even though he was an old guy, he was pretty smart about that kind of stuff.
Oh, no, forward thinking about tank tactics, firepower, artillery, made sure men were taken care of. I mean, I really mean a superb commander.
It seems like he might be something of an idiot savant, because if you're talking about any topic outside of strictly military affairs, I get the impression he was not very intelligent.
No, and to be fair, I mean, that's what he had studied so much. I mean, studied exhaustively. Like I said, like he's one of the guys who starts a reassessment of the Napoleonic Wars and Napoleon himself. So, a very deep military thinker too.
Because I think one of the that woman who rejected him partly did so because she thought that he was uncultured, because she would try to talk to him about normal topics that educated people would talk about, art, literature, whatever it might be, and Pétain would be completely uninterested and uninformed.
That kind of reminds me of Schlieffen. The guy who made the plan.
Yeah, Schlieffen, he of the plan.
He of the plan. There was an interesting story about him where him and one of his officers, they were crossing a river in a car, and they're crossing a stream, and the officer was like, "That's beautiful," and then Schlieffen looked at it and said, "Only a minor obstacle if troops were crossing it."
Wow. I think there are stories like that about Pyrrhus of Epirus, where he was asked to name his favorite artist, and he's like, "I don't give a shit about art. Let me tell you about my favorite generals, or my favorite warriors."
There we go. Pyrrhus, Charles XII, Schlieffen.
Yeah, and then Pétain, put them all in a room, and
that is a horrible, horrible room to be in.
Or how about this? You put them in a room, and whoever can go the longest without mentioning a military subject wins a prize. It becomes a competition.
Who would win in that group, man?
I don't know, but that would not be a long competition. I do know that much. I mean, it would be about a 3-minute competition.
I don't know. I mean, like, I'm just giving a wild guess here, but maybe Pyrrhus.
Possibly. Maybe. Although Pyrrhus, I think Pyrrhus kind of liked to talk about the battles he'd been in a lot, so.
Yeah, well, he'd been in a lot, right? No, there was, the thing I was thinking about with Vichy France, it's an interesting thing to point out is that one of the things that undermined the French during the war was the number of officers who, I mean, they'd fought in the First World War and whatnot, but they had really lost faith in the Republic. And, you kind of have people, the liberal democracy is in a crisis in the 1930s, and plenty of people are looking to communism, fascism, and Nazism for like, say, T.S. Eliot, right? T.S. Eliot had sympathies for the fascists, but once the war starts, he served in London, like one of the guys, like, looking up at the sky, one of the watchers looking for airplanes and Luftwaffe aircraft, right?
Right.
And then you get a guy like Ezra Pound, who pretty much hangs out in fascist Italy the whole time and is on the radio, right? And there was a cadre of French officers, Army and Navy, who believed the Republic was a fraud, and Vichy France was a chance to rebuild France along proper way. That's what they were thinking. A lot of them. So that's, I believe, one of the reasons France loses in 1940. And to be fair, the French officer corps had always been riven by political factions. When you hear about the French army in World War I, a lot of your highest-ranking French generals are simply there to sate one of the political factions.
Right.
Highly politicized army. All armies get a little bit politicized, but when you're kind of reading about World War II, probably of all the major armies, the one least politicized was the American one. I mean, as far as I can tell, there's not like a Republican or Democrat faction, right?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. I guess there were a few guys whose affiliation was a little obvious, but I guess that only came about after the election of FDR, though, right? With the sort of division about the New Deal.
Sort of. I will say this, though. FDR pumped some money into the Army, but FDR won the Navy over pretty hardcore.
Yeah, former Secretary of the Navy, so...
Former Undersecretary, he gave them vital funding through the 30s, showed a lot of interest in the Navy. So the Navy really felt like we've got our guy. And they did. But that's a whole different discussion. I guess we should go ahead and wrap things up before we meander into something else, You got any more comments about Napoleon's commanders?
No, I mean, good lot of people. I mean, maybe not morally necessarily, but in terms of their military talent, Napoleon had a pretty respectable bench, and a lot of those guys, maybe not all of them, but quite a few of them, I could have easily seen Napoleon giving a baton and putting them in charge, and they'd have done just fine.
Yeah, definitely. But once again, Napoleon's got political factions to say, friends to make happy, and batons don't grow on trees, and if they do, then it's not really worth it, is it?
Although they were supposedly in every soldier's backpack.
Yeah, supposedly. I will conclude with one thing, though. Could make a good argument that Hitler, especially early in World War II, was throwing out too many field marshal awards. After France fell, a whole bunch of German generals were declared field marshals. And one can make an argument that might have cheapened things. It certainly led to an amount of overconfidence that will lead to disaster in Russia, of course.
Yeah, and I guess once you promote somebody to field marshal, they become unusable outside of an army command, pretty much, right?
Yeah, they can't command anything else but an army or a theater, really.
Yeah, so...
Not too many administrative... Maybe some, big administrative post, possibly, but that's really about it. If you ever want to, is another thing we can talk about, not as a tier list, but we could always talk about the various armies, navies, and air forces in World War II for the 7 or 8 major combatants. And those major combatants being Germany and Italy, Britain, France, America, and the Soviet Union. And I say 8 because maybe China because of manpower, but that would be a tough one to get into.
Yeah.
But you could do a tier ranking for their army, their navy, and their air force,
Yeah, I've told you about one of my ideas for kind of a spoof video game before, right?
What is it, man?
Call of Duty Axis Minor Powers.
Oh God!
Yeah, so
the
the premise is you fight on the Eastern Front, and obviously you're massively under-equipped, and this is late in the war. Your morale is total shit. And rather, your winning of a scenario is not that you win some important battle, it's that you escape. And a lot of times this will involve abandoning your unit and escaping the field.
So this sounds like the Hungarian army, if you're talking late war.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess maybe not Call of Duty, maybe Call of Conscription to avoid having to pay Infinity Ward any money. So yeah, there we go.
This is great. Oh my God, this is dude, Call of Duty Conscription. You are a Hungarian conscript in World War II. You start off in 1941. You got to survive to 45.
Yeah, and maybe you make it more like a game where you wander around the countryside. You also have to avoid patrols looking for deserters, and your whole goal is just not to die. And you have to make it back to your... Well, I guess if you make it to your home, they'll find you. You got to find a place you can hole up. That's your goal.
Oh God, this is amazing.
Yeah, and then maybe you have to make sure you have enough supplies to last until that area is conquered. So yeah, that's the game. So if anybody out there knows how to make video games, let's link up and make this happen. Call of Conscription, Axis Minor Powers.
You could do that for Germany on the Eastern Front towards the end, where you're in the Volkssturm or something. You're like, Jesus Christ, I just want to get out of this,
Yeah, or if you're maybe as a more fun game, you're in the British Home Guard and you have to do all these drills, but then nothing ever happens.
That'd be Dad's army.
Yeah, and then also you have mini games of going to the pub and drinking. So it's sort of like a party game, kind of like Leisure Suit Larry or Mario Party, but it's yeah.
Oh, God. No, dude, think about it, man. If you're on the Eastern Front one, you're just trying to get to the Americans. You know?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, you have to escape to American or British lines.
Yeah, Call of Conscription Berlin. Like you're surrounded. You got to try to sneak through Berlin, sneak past the Soviets, and then get to the Elbe to get to the Americans or the British.
Yeah, and then the cover art is just like some obviously underage or overage conscript who is throwing down his weapon and saying "fuck this shit" in German.
Oh, make it even better, man. You know what weapon you start off with? One of those Franco-Prussian rifles they started handing off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. They opened up the armories and they found some Franco-Prussian rifles. So there's accounts of them being given the old needle guns from 18. Which I mean, keep in mind, it's not that bad of a gun, you know.
Yeah, it's probably just a kind of a shock for the people who'd never seen one before.
Oh yeah, it's kind of like your first modern repeating rifle, and it's not a terrible weapon necessarily. I will say this though, you still got countries in Africa that use T-34s.
Yeah, also South America apparently.
Yeah. So old equipment. I'm not saying that it's going to be taking on the Abrams tank, but it did kill people back then, and it will kill you now.
Well, apparently, it was either Paraguay or Uruguay. The government had tanks, but they were only used to fight crowds. So T-34 is perfectly fine for that.
Yeah, or let's say you're fighting a war and you have T-34s and they have none. I think you have an advantage.
Yeah, especially if they have no anti-tank weapons. If they have nothing but small arms, the T-34 is going to be a beast even in 2020.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll see what the future holds, man. I'll go ahead and call it quits, man.
All right, sounds good to me. I guess we've gone for about 3:10, so we had a pretty good postscript there, probably half an hour or so.
I hope you all liked our ramblings on the Nazi war criminals.
Yeah, Nuremberg and random rifles, video game ideas that hopefully all of you have the integrity to properly credit. Yeah, so that's all we have for you today. I'm Thersites the Historian. We'll see you again next week. So, peace out.